Good morning, dear colleagues. Today's key debate is on Russia's escalation of its war of aggression against Ukraine. On the 30th of September, after Russia staged a series of sham referenda, it illegally annexed the occupied territories of Ukraine in what is a blatant violation of Ukraine's sovereignty, territorial integrity and international law. So on behalf of the European Parliament, let me reiterate, Donetsk, Kherson, Luhansk and Zaporizhia, just like Crimea, are and will remain part of independent and sovereign Ukraine. And no sham referenda can ever change this. So it is my pleasure to now give the floor on behalf of the Council to Josep Borrell to open the debate, after which we give the floor to the President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. Mr. Borrell, you have the floor.
Good morning. I'm going to speak in Spanish. Señora Presidenta del Parlamento, señora
Presidents, Vice President, honourable members, I'm speaking in this plenary in representation of the Council of the European Union in order to explain to you that since, together with the Commission, the High Representative, we set out a new set of general and personal sanctions. Co-repair and our ambassadors have been working hard on this. Last night they were working, and the meetings are continuing this morning, and I trust that before the end of this plenary sitting, we will have reached an agreement within the Council and the adoption of the joint proposal put forward by the Commission, and I've no doubt that the President will give you the details. I'd like to thank the President of the Commission and my colleagues for the efforts and the leadership they've shown in continuing to come forward with proposals and debating proposals for sectoral sanctions together with the targeted personal sanctions. This should further constrain Russia's export capacity and the relations its industry can continue to carry out, particularly the technological sector linked to the war. In August of last year, we were importing 12 billion cubic litres, only 4 this year. We've cut our imports from Russia to a third of what they were. Over the last 36 weeks, we've reduced imports by 54 billion cubic meters. That's going to allow us to reduce our energy dependency on Russia, which severely constrained our foreign policy towards Russia, and as a result of that, an impact on our foreign policy, including Ukraine. We needed a foreign policy towards Ukraine. It had been subject to our policy with Russia, and that in turn had been subject to our energy dependency. But now we have a clear policy towards Ukraine, informed by our will to ensure that Ukraine go on to join the European Union. There's a clear goal behind this policy. This will become possible because we will no longer be so dependent on Russia. There's good news on the battlefield for Ukraine in the war. Ukraine is going back onto the offensive. The war has entered a new phase. It's undoubtedly a dangerous phase because we're in a terrible scenario now. We mustn't cut our eyes to this. There's a scenario of a conventional war involving a nuclear power which is currently retreating from the conventional theatre, but threatening to deploy nuclear weapons. This scenario is undoubtedly a source of concern, and we have to show that our support for Ukraine is not weakening. Ukraine is making progress on 3 fronts in the Donbass, having retaken Liman, and the centre and the south of Zaporizhia, advancing towards Mariupol, and lastly in Kherson. Russia still has numerical superiority, and it still has superior firepower. And that's why Ukrainian forces are using extremely agile tactics. They're using very powerful intelligence, surrounding concentrations of Russian power, creating pockets which are then destroyed as the Russian army itself withdraws. This allows the Ukrainian forces to keep their losses lower than they would have been and score successes that no one would earlier have forecast. The situation for us is extremely perilous. Russian soldiers, for one thing, don't actually know the purpose of this war. The 300,000 men who are going to be taken from their homes and sent to the front will understand it even less. So you can win a war on the battlefield, but first and foremost you have to win it on the battlefield of ideas, because behind the war as such, there's war as a struggle for supremacy of values. Russia is fighting hard around the world to make the case that the consequences of this war are actually the result of our sanctions against Russia. We have to fight that battle in talks with our colleagues all around the world. We must continue to isolate Russia. A very important international body, the ICAO, I met recently. We need to keep up this effort consistently, because there are a lot of strong feelings around the world regarding the causes of this war and, above all, its consequences. For many countries, the consequences of the war are undoubtedly bad ones, increasing energy and food costs. We have to make a strong commitment to the rest of the world to provide them with assistance to help them overcome the impact of this war. We'll have to make a huge diplomatic effort to explain the case so that the world will understand why it is that this war has come about and how it may end. It cannot end because the Western world, becomes exhausted. That's what Putin is hoping will happen. He thinks that democracies are weak, that systems of public opinion, he thinks, won't put up with a Cold War. He's waiting for General Winter to come along, which has always helped Russia win previous conflicts. He's hoping that the cold and the cut in gas supplies and high energy prices and low temperatures will undermine our will to continue our support to Ukraine. And this is the place where I have to ask Europeans to understand what's going on. Our support for Ukraine isn't just a question of generosity. Our support for Ukraine has to remain total, because Ukraine's fate is intimately bound up with our own. What happens there entails our future too. Yes, honourable members, decisions there determine our future too. And that's why it's so important to ensure that, just as others have done in Europe, foregoing our previous imperial ambitions, Russia also needs to give up its imperial ambitions. We need to work in a way to ensure that there's peace, and that means that Ukraine must recover its territorial integrity and its full sovereignty. Russia must shoulder its political and moral responsibilities in the war, must pay for the reconstruction, and those responsible for crimes against humanity committed there must be brought to account. That must be our goal. And so we have our sanctions, and we're providing our military assistance, and we're taking diplomatic action. On those 3 fronts, we must continue to redouble our efforts unflaggingly. This is not the time for doubt. European society must be able to keep up this struggle, supporting Ukraine using the procedures we have available to us. The President of the Commission today will be presenting the details of the sanctions package that the Council will be adopting, but above and beyond specific sanctions, the really important thing is for Europeans to grasp that if there's a price to be paid, that price is worth it, because if we don't pay this price, we will end up paying a much higher price later. This is a battle for freedom, for Ukrainians, but also for our freedom. And the effort we have to make will be written into history books as a point in history where a united Europe proved able to resist the aggression of a radically different political organisation from our own. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the High Representative. Next, I give the floor to Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, please.
Thank you, President Metsola, dear Roberta, Minister, HRVP, dear Josep, honourable members. It's just 4 weeks ago that we met here in the hemicycle for the State of the Union, but in those 4 weeks, the Kremlin has escalated its aggression to a new level. Putin has launched Russia's first mobilization since World War II, treating hundreds of thousands of young Russians as cannon fodder. He uses sham referenda in an illegal attempt to change international borders by force. And since many months, he is using energy as a weapon. Now, of course, we feel that the Russian war causes economic and social hardship, and it places a heavy burden on our citizens and on the economy and in our single market. We see in particular the rising energy prices and gas and electricity prices that are leading to reduced purchasing power, and they are leading to a loss of competitiveness for our business in the international market. But our resilience in all these difficult times is remarkable. And what we have to do is work steadily on our resilience, mainly on the field of energy, and that's where I want to focus on today. If you look at the course of the last 7 months, together with our member states, we have already taken important steps. We have diminished our gas consumption by around 10%. That's good. It's not enough. We have to do more, but it's a big step forward. I want to give you 2 figures what the Russian supplies of gas are concerned. At the beginning of the war, if you look at all the imports of gas, the Russian share was 41%. Within 7 months, we have gone down to 7.5%. That's good. And we have compensated this decrease in Russian supplies by a massive increase by our trusted suppliers, for example, the United States, for example, Norway. Let's look at gas storage. It is almost at 90% by now. This is 15% higher than on the same day last year. 3 weeks ago in this hemicycle, I announced that we will skim the exceptional profits that electricity-producing companies have these days to make them available for member states to support vulnerable citizens and businesses. Now, last week already, we have enshrined that in law, EU law. We achieved that in lightning speed, and I really want to thank the Czech presidency for this outstanding deliverable in really a very, very short time. And yesterday, the Council reached agreement on Repower EU. So, we will have key instruments in place to make it through the winter, that's storage and saving, to jointly purchase gas, this is our platform, to get rid of the grip the Russians have on us through their fossil fuels, these are our agreements with other friends, to redistribute the windfall profits to support those in need, and to invest in the future of a sustainable energy supply, and that is Repower EU. The measures we have put in place provide us with a first buffer of protection, and thanks to these, We can and we will now step up to the next level. I will lay out a roadmap in a letter to leaders in view of our meeting in Prague in 2 days this week. And I want to discuss with you firsthand the key components of this letter. Of course, it's all about energy prices. So we will step up our negotiations with trusted partners, for example, with Norway, to dampen the price we pay for gas imports. The talks have already started. I think as a European Union, we have a considerable market power, and many of our suppliers want to conclude deals with us which are beneficial for both sides. So I really think it is necessary that we come to an agreed corridor of prices to stop these crazy peaks we have partially in the import of gas prices. We will strengthen our energy platform. And let me be very clear, it is in our collective interest. After the winter, we will have to refill the gas storages. And if we then see that we have again a scenario where member states are outbidding each other on the global market and thus rising the prices here in the European Union, this is not sustainable. So we have to have a joint procurement of all member states. This is much better than the way we have it. My next point is on gas prices. As you know, we use gas in 3 different domains: for industry, for heating, and for the production of electricity. Let me start with the electricity. Our market for electricity is built in a way that high gas prices are driving electricity prices. We have now to limit this inflationary impact of gas on electricity and everywhere in Europe. This is why we are ready to discuss a cap on the price of gas that is used to generate electricity. This cap would also be a first step on the way to a structural reform, an overall reform of our electricity market. But I think we also have to have a look at gas prices beyond the electricity market. So where industry is concerned, where heating is also concerned, the general approach of gas. And here we will work together with member states to reduce gas prices and to limit volatility, and thus to limit the impact of price manipulation by Russia. Because if you look at the fever curve of gas and gas prices, the whole gas price, you can see the manipulation that Russia has on the gas prices, and this has to stop. We have already offered this mechanism in March. At that time, we've said that it can give an important signal that the EU will not pay any price for gas anymore. We have qualified such a price cap as having an immediate impact on price levels, but that it entails drawbacks in terms of security of supply. This is still true today, so it's a fine line to walk. It's not trivial to do that. But the situation since March has critically evolved since then, and today, compared to March, member states are open now for it, more member states are open for it, and we are better prepared. Such a cap on gas prices must be designed properly to ensure security of supply, and it is a temporary solution to cater for the fact that the TTF, that is our main price benchmark, is no longer representative for our market. This TTF benchmark reflects or mirrors a lot pipeline gas. But in the last 7 months, we have, because we wanted to get rid of the dependency on Russian gas, we have increased a lot the LNG market. And this LNG market is not properly reflected in the TTF. So, introducing a cap on gas overall is a temporary solution until we will have a new EU price index developed that ensures a better functioning of the market. And the Commission has already started to work on this. Honourable members, these are far-reaching measures. And I wholeheartedly agree with you when you say in the resolution you will vote on today that exceptional times require exceptional measures where the Union needs to act as jointly and as united as ever. In pursuing our action, two same things remain paramount. That is action in unity and action in solidarity. If I look at our single market, we really need to protect the fundamentals of our economy and in particular our single market. The single market is the strength of our European Union, and this is where the wealth of the European Union comes from. Without a common European solution, we risk fragmentation. If every member state goes on its own, we have fragmentation we don't want, and we have to do something against it. And therefore, it is so paramount that we preserve a level playing field within the European Union and our single market. Every member state is benefiting from it. As I said, the wealth comes from our single market. Now, what does that mean? With Repower EU, we have developed a crucial instrument to accelerate the transition in the energy independence. That's what we're working on since 7 months. And Repower EU will allow, it's the governance structure, it will allow the investment in infrastructure, for example, pipelines, for example, interconnectors, for example, renewables. But it also allows, and that's important, to support businesses or households to invest in energy efficiency, for example, insulating houses or installing heat pumps or installing new technology for the companies, the businesses that have to do the transition. Now, here's my proposal. I think we should further boost Repower EU with additional funding, common European funding. This way, all European states can accelerate the necessary investment, all European member states. We modernize our infrastructure, the energy infrastructure. We preserve the level playing field, and we secure our European competitiveness on the global market. So we have to do this investment, we have to do this funding together as Europeans, jointly with a common solution. And honourable members, allow me to speak about another pressing issue which we have to address today. The acts of sabotage against Nord Stream pipelines have shown how vulnerable our energy infrastructure is. For the first time in recent history, it has become a target. Pipelines and underwater cables connect European citizens and companies to the world. They are the lifeline of data and energy. It is in the interest of all Europeans to better protect this critical infrastructure. And for this, I will present a 5-point plan. First, we must be better prepared. We have very recently agreed new legislation, that's good, which will strengthen the resilience of critical EU entities. The responsible Parliament committee will be voting on it next week. That's good too. So we are absolutely on time. And I think we can and we should already now be working on this basis. Second, we need to stress test our infrastructure. We don't have to wait till something happens, but we need to make sure that we are prepared, and therefore we need those stress tests. We need to identify whether we have weak points and where these weak points are. And of course, we have to prepare our reaction to sudden disruption. What are we doing then? Are all the information chains in place? Is everybody informed? Does this emergency scenario really work then in our single market? We will work with member states to ensure effective stress tests in the energy sector. And this then should be followed by other high-risk sectors such as the offshore digital and the electricity infrastructure. My third point, we will increase our capacity to respond through our civil protection mechanism, well known to you in the European Union. With this, we can support member states in addressing the disruption of critical infrastructure, for example, with fuel, with generators, with necessary shelter capacity. My fourth point, we will make best use of our satellite surveillance capacity. We have these satellites in place. We have the capacity to do the surveillance, to detect potential threats. So this is also a matter of prevention and awareness. And finally, we will strengthen our cooperation with NATO and with key partners like the United States on this critical issue. Honourable members, this war has entered in a new phase. The Ukrainian army keeps reporting impressive successes in its fight against the aggressor. We all saw the images of deeply relieved people welcoming Ukrainian soldiers. And I could see with my own eyes when I was 3 weeks ago in Kiev that life has come back to Kiev. Of course, it is the bravery of the Ukrainian people that made it possible. But I think Europe's contribution also has made a huge difference. And now it's the time to keep track, to help the Ukrainians to face down the invader. A strong and steadfast Europe, that will only be the only way to stop Putin. This is the moment to stay the course and to signal again to our Ukrainian friends, we stay by your side as long as it takes. Thank you and long live Europe.
Thank you very much. Commission President, I give the floor now to the leaders of the political groups, starting with the EPP Group, Manfred Weber.
Madam President of the Parliament, the European Commission, High Representative, Minister, dear colleagues, more than 220 days have passed since Putin started his invasion in Ukraine on 24th of February. More than 220 days of tremendous suffering, bloodshed and destruction of Ukraine, people and the whole country. By end of last month, we will see 13 million people fleeing Ukraine, crossing the borders to the neighboring countries. 6,000 Ukrainians died. 379 children lost their life in the Russian war. Putin is a war criminal, and as all war criminals, he doesn't stop. But not the weapons or money are winning a war. People, the will of people, the determination of people, and most of all, free people defending their freedom are winning a war. As Europeans, we only can admire what the Ukrainian troops are doing every day in Liman, in Cherson. In congratulations to President Zelensky and the Ukrainian troops, you are great. And obviously, even among the autocrats of this world, Russia is losing ground. We saw this in Samarkand, where even the Prime Minister of India, Modi, said publicly it's not the right moment to go to war. Fake referenda in occupied Ukraine territories, mobilising now 300,000 Russian reservists and threatening to us nuclear weapons. This is obviously a signal of weakness. So the Ukrainians are doing their job. And Europe? First of all, the upcoming winter is a big test for us, and we have to win it. First of all, we have to be strong against the populists inside of the European Union. Just look to Marine Le Pen. In the presidential election race this year, she proposed to seek an alliance with Russia without fear of US sanctions. Back in 2014, Front National found no better supporter than Russian banks to finance its campaign. Anyone, dear friends, who loves his country would never ask for money from Putin. That is what Le Pen is doing. Dear colleagues, in Spain, just after the start of the war, Podemos stated that the heart of the Ukraine conflict lies in the NATO policy of enlargement towards Eastern Europe. Unbelievable lies. Or in Slovakia, the former president and party leader Robert Fico from Smer party described the war as a conflict between the United States and Russia. He called the strengthening of NATO forces in Slovakia by German soldiers the welcoming of the Wehrmacht in our country. That is the wording of leaders in Europe of today. And these populists, dear friends, have only one idea. They have the idea to weaken Europe, and we have to stand up to defend Europe. No more than ever, it's time now to show that we are standing together, and the EPP will never accept to rewrite the history. Our EPP parties in Finland and Sweden, for example, fought always, argued always for NATO membership. Only recently, socialists changed their mind and also supported NATO membership of Sweden and Finland. NATO defends freedom and peace and security in Europe, and Putin wants to destroy our Europe. And that's why, again, we have to show unity. At the same time, Putin's threats must not determine now our actions. That's why we have to support our Ukrainian friends more than ever before. Now more than ever before, it's time for European leadership. Without weapons from the West, Putin would have won long ago already. Ukraine urgently needs more weapons, including tanks, and there I ask France and Germany to lead Europe and to present a proposal to deliver also tanks. We support another action package of sanctions and financial assistance to Ukraine. And if we want this war to end, we need actions, but not any more excuses. Europe needs leadership. And now, more than ever before, it's time for this winter of solidarity. On Friday, the European Council must find a common understanding on the energy solidarity. And, Madam Commission President, we fully support your initiatives in this field. Continuation of uncertainty costs each and every European money. Uncertainty is driving speculation on the market, so we need a binding solidarity mechanism, we need common procurement, and we need a price cap as proposed by the Commission, and we need this now, this clarity. And let me also add, because on Thursday we have this first meeting of the political union, President Erdogan will be there. And let me also underline that we should not forget, next to the Ukraine war, that we have other challenges in our neighbourhood. I think that someone who is not practicing our solidarity with Ukraine in the same way, who is not implementing the same sanctions in a way like we do as Europeans, cannot be a candidate status for the European Union, cannot be a reliable partner for us. That's why I hope that we also have a clear wording towards President Erdogan that he has to show his European commitment. With Putin escalating the war, it's now even more time to firmly stand by Ukraine. We as EPP, we always did so and we always will do so, now more than ever before. Without a free Ukraine, there will be not a fully free Europe. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Weber. I now give the floor on behalf of the S&D Group to Irache Garcia Perez.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Ms. von der Leyen, High Representative. Minister. In recent days, the world has seen further rash, crazy actions by Putin, the mobilisation and dangerous rhetoric regarding the use of nuclear weapons. But also, for the first time, there have been serious worrying events occurring outside Ukrainian territory. And here I'm referring to the sabotage of energy infrastructure in the Baltic Sea. The world is following this escalation with apprehension. A civil convoy was attacked by Russian forces near Zaporizhzhia last week, with fatalities and injuries. Day in, day out, this is the reality of Putin's war machine. It's a cruel war against the civilian population of Ukraine. Civilians are dying, being displaced. They've had to leave their homes, fleeing atrocities. Last week's annexation by Putin is illegal and a clear violation of the UN Charter. Similarly, changing Ukraine's borders unilaterally without any proper checks on is nothing more than propaganda. It shows what Putin is, a desperate man whose leadership and authority are more in doubt every day. This dangerous escalation must lead us to give further support to Ukraine and its citizens. We must step up our support to keep Russia's dangerous actions in check. We need extra sanctions to bring an end to this war. so that Putin will end up where he belongs before the International Tribunal in The Hague. And so we need to keep up a united front in our response. That means we have to isolate as much as we possibly can those European leaders who flirt with Putin. And of course, they do exist. In my political family, we're extremely concerned. We know about Orban's isolated position on sanctions towards Russia. But trying to weave an alliance with Meloni poses a problem that may lead all of us towards a very worrying shift. We know about the cooperation between Salvini's League Party and Putin, and we're worried about Berlusconi's comments to the effect that Putin wanted to replace Zelensky with good, decent people. That's what Berlusconi said. Is that what we must expect from the new Italian government? As far as that goes, our colleagues in the European People's Party need to do something, because Putin's going to keep up his efforts to divide us. And the greater the threats, the greater the need for unity in our political action. Mr. Weber, we need political responsibility from you at this time. There has to be an understanding that the real alliance we need is with those who defend European values. I can understand that you are in a situation now where it's hard for you to grasp the real state of play. But quite frankly, outside here, a lot of people are extremely concerned by what's going on. And above and beyond the election tactics that anyone may have, what we need is to stick to the path of those of us who are defending the European project. Some of us have stayed on the spot right from the beginning. Here we've been defending Europe and European values, and I'm extending a hand of friendship to you so that you can continue on this path together.
I give the floor next on behalf of the Renew Europe group to Petras Austrevicius.
Madam President, President of the Commission, High Representative Ministers, dear colleagues, it's probably time to end up our empty, insignificant disagreements and to focus on real things, on things which shape present world and our future. Putin, who claims to be the ruler of the world, wanted to conquer Ukraine and enslave its people in 3 days. Not only has he failed, but it has turned into continuation of the atrocious crimes against humanity and the shameful defeats incurred on the Russian aggressor. Realizing his impotence in the face of a heroic Ukraine, its resistance and nationwide mobilization, Putin has resorted to the tool of annexation of temporarily occupied Ukrainian territories in order to create a situation of a permanent war. It is as the state of terrorism acts in today's politics. And I call Russia a state which supports and implements a policy of terrorism. The civilized world must respond to Russia's colonial war aggression, even with stronger sanctions and increased support for Ukraine. Russian policy also demonstrates a turning point from adherence to the international law-based order. To the outside world, it became opportunistic and unpredictable, and domestically resulted into a deep moral and social degradation of the Russian state. It is a high time to realize that our trade, Western trade, and our economic relations with the Russian aggressor is not an option. It must discontinue. In these extraordinary circumstances, dear colleagues, Ukraine needs security guarantees now, not in a distant future. Now is the time for Ukraine, when its fates to be decided and well-being of Ukrainian people are at stake. It's time when European security is challenged and to be decided for next decades. NATO membership of Ukraine is the solution. And we need to reap its benefits now as soon as possible through additional formats of cooperation and partnerships. Long live Europe and Slava Ukraini. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Austrevicius. Next is on behalf of the Green Group, Sergei Lagodinsky.
For long enough, we've heard these statements of solidarity with Ukraine and the Ukrainians, these over-hasty pseudo-referendums in occupied territories and the mobilisation of the Russian population that Putin said he never actually wanted, show quite clearly that Putin doesn't understand the fancy words in these speeches. He only understands the resolute sound of speeches and acts. Let's not regret what's happening. Let's go to court. Let's not talk about the unconventional professions of regret about what's happening to the Ukrainian population. Let us provide the concrete support of weapons that Ukrainians need. Hence, I'm not going to hold a fancy speech here. Others have done that in my stead. Maybe just picking up on a few points out of the resolution that we have adopted. Firstly, and most importantly, making sure that the incorporation of the regions that have been occupied into the country is not acceptable. These occupied territories remain occupied territories. A war of liberation remains a war of liberation, and the Ukrainians remain Ukrainians in the borders that exist, that are theirs, including the eastern border in those regions of Zaporizhia, Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and right to the southern point of Crimea. That is reality, and that's how it should stay. Secondly, the individual sanctions need to be extended, and I would call on the Council and the Commission here, make sure that the people who are reigning there, those in the regional parliaments, those in the Duma, should all be put on the list. Anybody in the Duma party should be on that list. They're the ones who are pursuing war. They're the ones who are supporting Putin and the war. They have to be put on that list. Thirdly, the security of our own infrastructure is not a toy. We shouldn't see that 100% of our data, which is traveling around the world, is just being monitored, if you like, by a few ships. We're in the middle of an attack on us. That is actually happened. We need to be prepared for that. And finally, resilience and resolution for the coming months will be tested, and it will be decisive on how this confrontation will end up. We are in a confrontation. We're not going to be divided by this aggression, and we shouldn't be divided either by economic attacks. We know that certain countries are carrying out various sanctions, but we need a Europeanization, if you like, of this whole effort. We need a green-oriented effort that is European in nature. Yes, individual states can press on, press ahead, but we have to complement that with European measures. That's the only way that we can win this confrontation.
And next, on behalf of the ID Group, Marco Zanni.
Grazie.
Thank you, President. I'm sorry that once again I have to take some time from my speaking time to respond to those who are using this opportunity for their own ends. The socialist group, which doesn't accept the results of elections and ignore the what the far left is doing. And then we see those who are hosting the big lobbyists. We see what the former Chancellor Schröder is doing, and we see those just ignoring what is being done because it's being done by socialists. So, of course, Italy, after the elections, will be a positive player in support to Ukraine. I've listened carefully to what was said by President von der Leyen and the High Representative, but we are very concerned. It seems that the clock has gone back, the clock of history. If we look back to February, once again we have a war in Europe. We're going back to the situation more than 70 years ago, a catastrophe in history, and we're facing a nuclear threat, an escalation, the threat of a Cold War, things we hoped we had left behind us. But they are back again in force, and Europe needs to show unity, as it has done over the last few months, to stop these threats becoming a reality. The High Representative talked about the new sanctions package. And I think here the European institutions have shown unity, leadership, pragmatism and realism, which was required. And we need to make sure that there is still major support for those measures. But as has already been said, in parallel to that, Europe needs to come up with support measures for businesses and families. We need strong support for the Ukrainians when fighting this war, but we shouldn't let the burden weigh on our citizens. I do share the optimism you voiced that the winter will be relatively calm. We have all the instruments needed to get through this winter unscathed, but we really need support measures, and I put out an appeal here. I'm glad to hear that there will be progress on the price cap. We know how difficult it is to reach an agreement. We know that it will not be easy to impose a price cap on imports from Russia. But over the last few months, these citizens have been asking certain things. We've seen support for NATO by the EU, but it seems that the allies haven't shared the burden of the measures. We know that the allies have provided support when it comes to gas supplies to the EU, but with those allies, we have been on a journey and we need strong support for Europe, Norway, the United States, Canada. All these countries are NATO members, and they are earning 6 or 7 times more with their supplies to Europe. So I think we should encourage the allies to consider their own price cap, particularly when it comes to the next few months. We need all necessary support. Possibly this will involve reduction in profit margins to make sure that Europe can support the approach of the West and NATO to Ukraine. Thank you.
Of the ECR group to Anna Fotyga.
President, High Rep Vice President, thanks to the fantastic resistance of Ukrainian army and people, and facing humiliating defeat in his war waged against Ukraine, Vladimir Putin and Russian institutions committed a series of fatal mistakes. But he also renewed his nuclear threats against the collective West, not only against Ukraine. My appeal here from this chamber to Western media and to individual politicians is to refrain from playing Putin's game, from repeating about threat of nuclear war. The proper action to be taken within the collective West is to revise the nuclear deterrence schemes and make Putin and Russian elites sure that any strike against Ukraine's neighbors or any ally and EU member state as well is to be fatal for him and his country. There is no place in contemporary world for this kind of state terrorism. Thank you.
I give the floor next to Martin Schirdewan on behalf of the Left Group.
Thank you very much, Madam President. This war has to be ended as soon as possible. Russia's illegal annexation of parts of Ukraine, partial mobilisation and the threats of the use of nuclear weapons have constituted a massive escalation of this conflict. Putin is playing with fire. He is drawing in more and more innocent people who are going to be led to their deaths if this damn war is not ended as soon as possible. That's why we're asking for an end to this war of aggression by Russia and a withdrawal of Russian troops from Ukraine. And yes, targeted sanctions against the military and other apparatus are quite effective. I was in Schwedt recently. Ms. von der Leyen, there were hundreds of people there. We heard that the people in this region are scared and they are waiting for decisions to be taken, because there are decisions being taken that are not going to pertain to the industrial future of their area. It's about what has changed in their real lives and what they need to survive on a day-to-day basis. And whoever wants freedom, you have to talk about diplomacy. And what we hear from the Commission here again today, or representatives of individual governments, including that of Germany, have been saying, I'm just wondering if anybody really understands diplomacy and negotiation to end this war as soon as possible. Is anybody interested in that at all? Apart from further sanctions, further deliveries of weapons, nobody seems to have come up with anything. Even the Pope, a few days ago, called on other politicians to push for dialogue to end this war. European politics has an obligation to stop this spiral of escalation. We have to finally sit down and contribute to peace to end this terrible war. And of course, our solidarity goes out to the Ukrainians. Our solidarity goes to those populations who are suffering. And as harsh as this attack of Russia is on the land and the populations, diplomatic channels have to be kept open. Yes, Putin is a terrible warmonger, but we cannot punish the Russian population because of that. We have to show solidarity to those Russians who want to oppose the war. People who are subject to the partial mobilization has led to a flood of people trying to cross borders to leave. These people who are working actively against war and for peace should not see the EU turn their backs on them. They shouldn't be arrested and sent back.
Yeah.
Merci, Madame la...
Thank you, Madam President. President, dear colleagues, there's no doubt about the regime in Ukraine and what's happening. If we look at the roots of the conflict, it was Putin who decided to invade. And I think those wanting this to end need to take account of the responsibility of the UN, France and Germany in getting the Minsk agreements complied with and accepting the US's extreme position. Now we see the new set of sanctions being introduced by the Commission, and these effects have not been approved. We see what's going on with regard to Azerbaijan and Armenia. We see the double standards. Our objective isn't to be a party to the conflict. And what is in the interests of Europe is to have a ceasefire. And you will have to give an account, Madam President, to the citizens of Europe.
Frau Präsidentin.
Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, in the systemic conflict between our democracies living in peace and a warmongering dictator, in recent weeks we've seen once again escalation, and this deeply fascist aggressor has been carrying out activities to try and annex territories and carry out referendums, pretending that these people are just waiting for Russia to bring them home. But these Potemkin villages are facades which will fall. Now it's a question of making Ukraine fit for the winter, and we need to look at confirming the delivery of arms. Yes, unfortunately, it's necessary. The American Land Lease Act is something I'd like to see here in Europe, at least in a number of member states. That would speed up deliveries of weapons because it would make the individual approvals OTOs. And I think Germany and France have to come with their contribution. Europe has to unite on this. We have to have a comparable contribution of weapons that we are already seeing in Eastern member states. We cannot have people going alone. We have coordinated deliveries of tanks, Leopard tanks, for example, and that's something that the Foreign Secretary or the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the German Parliament is doing. Helmut Schmidt comes from Hamburg. He did the right thing. The NATO dual decision is something that he decided on against the interests of certain people, but it served history. Don't be scared of your own party. Approve the Marder and Leopard tanks deliveries. History will prove you right.
2 minutes.
Obrigado, Senhora Presidente.
Thank you, President. High Representative, President of the Commission, Minister, colleagues. Another month has gone by in Russia's war of aggression on Ukraine. As the President of the Commission said, this has not been any ordinary month. It's been a month of heroic reconquest of territory by the Ukrainian forces, but also this mock annexation of regions occupied by Putin's forces. That just shows what sort of democratic model he has in mind. Voting with a gun to your head is actually an attack on democracy. The annexation of Ukrainian territory is immoral and illegal in the eyes of international law. No one will be able to support that sort of action. Ukraine is entitled to defend itself, and we Europeans have the moral duty to support him. History will severely judge anyone who stands by Putin, trying to destroy the unity of the European Union. But the far right is capable of doing this out of pure thirst for power. We have to be decisive in our action. First of all, we have to provide political, economic and military support to the Ukrainians, but we also need more sanctions on the Russian economy and its war machine. We must finally stop buying energy from Russia, squeezing out the oligarchs and working to rebuild Ukraine. Let's not forget that here in Europe, all Europeans who are suffering the consequences of the war also need support. In the electricity and gas markets, we need to fight speculation and bring down prices, calling for immediate action from the institutions. We have to be resolute in our support for Ukraine. There has to be a truly united European response, not just those who are least able to support. We have to support European families to show European solidarity so that we can all continue to support those who are fighting this war for freedom, a war we didn't seek, but one that we have to win. Thank you.
Nathalie Loiseau for 1.5 minutes.
Plus personne ne peut ignorer.
No one can ignore what the Russian people want. They've decided to make the Ukrainian people suffer and to be hostile. From now on, the world has everything to gain. If the Russians win, there will be no Ukraine left. So I say, stop attacking Ukraine. Ukraine does not wish to attack Russia. Zelensky never talked about denazifying the Kremlin. You have nothing to win and everything to lose from this terrible war and these sham referenda. And I say that to the Ukrainian, to the Russians, and I say to the Europeans, it is not the time to flag in our support for Ukraine. There are results from the sanctions. The nuclear threat, the sabotage of the pipelines are just an attempt to intimidate us. We need to provide Ukraine with more arms more quickly, because now is the time. If we want to make the war shorter, we need to stand firm with our support, our determination. Ukraine must win, it can win, and it will win. Slava Ukraini.
Jordi Soler for 1.5 minutes.
Putin's regime has continually violated international law since the very beginning of Russia's latest aggression against Ukraine, but actually long before that, remember Crimea. The sham referendums that took place in 4 Ukrainian regions 2 weeks ago constitute yet further mockery of international law and democratic principles. These so-called referendums, which happen in military-occupied territories with a brutal war of aggression ongoing and with forced displacements of population, were simply a pretext for the illegal and violent annexation of Ukrainian territories. They were nothing but another of Putin's failed attempts to feign legitimacy for a criminal aggression. But make no mistake, this has got nothing to do with the democratic right to self-determination, which is a honourable right that has to be upheld. These fake referendums are not acts of self-determination. They are an act of external determination. The free will of the people cannot be expressed at gunpoint. Borders should never be changed by the use of force. We shall continue to stand firmly with the people of Ukraine, imposing more sanctions on those who fuel and sustain the aggression and blatantly disregard basic principles of democracy and international law.
Thank you. Next is Nikolaus Fest for 1.5 minutes.
Frau Präsidentin.
Madam President, thank you very much. And we see the mobilisation, we hear the nuclear threat. Russia's war against Ukraine is in a new stage now. If the EU wants to be taken seriously, it needs to find an answer, something more than pointless sanctions which damage the EU's own countries. But not just the Russia-Ukraine war is a threat to us, but an act of piracy against Nord Stream 1 and 2 has shown the vulnerability of Europe strangely, but this doesn't seem to be a topic on the agenda. Everyone just accepts this, shrugging their shoulders. Just ignoring the fact of this damage to a pipeline. So who did this? Well, we have the US cruisers, we have US flights in the air. The US president said that he wanted to stop Nord Stream 2, and Antony Blinken seized the opportunity of the sabotage to sell gas to Europe. And we've seen a member of the parliament putting out tweets about this. And who was the perpetrator? Many say Putin, but it could be North Korea, Iran, or Greta Thunberg. So we have made a request as an amendment asking for a clarification on this, and it's not just a question of destroying NATO, but the EU.
Mr. Waszczykowski speaking from seat 840.
Yes, I thank you, Madam President, Commissioner. We should have listened to Poland, Ursula von der Leyen mentioned in the State of the Union address. Poland was warning you not only about the imperial aggressive plans of Russia, we were warning also that your instrument to challenge the threats are inaccurate. Strategy, compass, European autonomy, European peace facilities, etc. These are inaccurate to face the Russian threats. Our recipe was to stick to NATO and transatlantic relations. And who is now helping Ukraine to defend themselves and us Europeans? It's US, UK and Poland, the country who are sanctioning and penalizing. How will you face the challenge of further escalation? Cooperation with NATO and US is a good direction. However, how will you help Ukraine by concrete terms? Will you release funds of 3 billion euros out of 9 promised? Will you force European countries to send more weapons? Will you stop penalizing Poland, which is helping Ukraine the most in political, military and humanitarian way? Thank you.
Thank you. I give the floor next to Manu Pineda for 2 minutes.
Gracias, Presidente.
Thank you, President. President von der Leyen, Vice President Borrell. What Mr. Weber said has forced me to change the start of my speech. I think the godfather of the agreement with his party in Italy, with the descendant of fascism and Mussolini in Italy, was something in very bad taste. Now, this is a time when there's a threat of nuclear war, which is very real. This war needs to end. The best way forward is diplomacy. It's not enough just to make statements, particularly those who've sown the seeds of this conflict. Putin is responsible mainly for this war, but NATO, with its eastwards expansion, hasn't helped. It seems to be a return to the Cold War and a bipolar world, to the detriment of multilateralism and the autonomy of people. And we see that there is persecution of social movements and unions and so on in the country. The EU had an opportunity for an autonomous foreign policy but decided to subordinate itself to the United States. It's a very difficult situation for Europe, and it's the working class which has to bear the brunt of the crisis. And we are firmly committed to peace and defending the working class. The EU needs to rethink what it's doing, even just in its own interests. We need to act in time. I urge for the role of the OSCE to come to the forefront again as a guarantee of peace and security in Europe. We should study Mexico's proposal to the UN General Assembly. It proposes peace conversations and tripartite conversations between UN, India and the Vatican. This is the right way forward to de-escalate. More diplomacy, not more NATO.
Dachowski for 1 minute.
Som predsedom politickej strany.
I am the chairperson of a Slovak political party, the Slovak Patriot. Me, as a member of the European Parliament, wanted to see the real situation in Ukraine, and members of my party were in Ukraine during the referenda. If to inform in an unbiased way about the referenda, probably most of you wouldn't believe me, and Mrs. von der Leyen would have to blush. So I will not use this speaking time for that purpose. On the resolution, I will vote on the resolution according to the truth, which means in a different way than the majority of MEPs. Thank you.
Thank you. Adesso do la parola a Antonio Tajani.
I'll give the floor to Antonio Tajani.
Grazie, signor Presidente.
Thank you, President. Never more than today, we need a strong, cohesive, united Europe, taking joint choices to defend the rule of law, to defend Ukraine's independence, and to prevent totalitarian movements around the world holding sway over democracies. That's why we need a credible Europe as far as its energy policy is concerned too. It's in everyone's interest to have a cap on gas prices. We can't allow the Russian Federation to divide us, putting our families and businesses in a difficult situation. So we need to thrash out checks on gas prices in light of what's been happening on the Amsterdam Stock Exchange. Perhaps you allow me to say, Madam President, at this juncture, well, I've been fighting for 28 years. This is my last speech in this House, and I want to confirm my commitment to a political Europe with a stronger parliament, with greater legislative powers, so that in the years to come, all of us can continue to be proud citizens of Europe. I'd like to thank all of you, starting with you, Madam President. I'd like to thank all my colleagues in my political group, but also the other political groups. As President of Parliament, I've always tried to be objective, and may I apologise for any mistakes I may have made. I always sought to show respect for all MEPs from whatever political group they might be. Thank you once again. I'd also like to thank the officials, including the interpreters, for everything they've done to allow us to speak our mother tongues. Thank you, all of you. I will continue my work in the Italian Parliament, fighting for a stronger political Europe. Thank you.
Grazie. Grazie, Presidente. In bocca al lupo, grazie Presidente.
Good luck and thank you, President.
I give the floor now for 2 minutes to Marek Belka.
Pani Przewodnicząca.
Madam President, the escalation of Russian measures and the spectacular defeats are not really a surprise for those who've been watching Vladimir Putin's policies very closely. Through the fake referendums, through the panic mobilization, the threats of nuclear weapons, Russia is hoping that they can mobilize the remainder of their power and try to win back part of sovereign Ukrainian territory. Even the closest allies are shifting away from Russia, and the rest of the world can see that this is a criminal country or even a terrorist state. As Europeans, we have lived through decades where we've been living under the threat of a nuclear apocalypse. We cannot live through that again. So we have to provide Ukraine with weapons and industrial support, economic support. There needs to be sanctions put in place against the criminal regime. And also we have to have monitoring of Russian activities around the world. Our weapons are unity and cooperation, and also work within the NATO alliance. There are a lot of places around Europe, and then you see those in Moscow, Brussels or Washington who need to be monitored. We need to reach those Russians these people who are being told you're in the army now, and at the same time the shops having less and less goods on their shelves. Ukraine, be strong.
Muito bom dia a todos.
Good morning, everyone. Now we'll continue through the list of speakers. Coming now to Hilda Veltmans, who has 1.5 minutes. Thank you, President. High Representative, colleagues. After 7 months of warfare, the threat of escalation, of military and nuclear escalation, is greater than ever. And it just shows how desperate Putin is at the prospect of his war failing. He's a threat to the world. He'll use every means available to destabilize us, and above all, to divide us. Are we going to allow that? Or are we going to stand as one united European bloc as we were at the beginning of the war? The cold winter is coming, colleagues, but it must not allow that unity to be destroyed. So why is the Council delaying the cap on gas prices? Why is it allowing Hungary to hold up sanctions? And why is the driving force of our economy still doing its own thing instead of opting for this European-wide decision? European leaders will be coming together at an informal meeting of the Council on Friday. Whether or not it's informal, colleagues, important decisions have to be taken there. And above all, as far as I'm concerned, that means a European response to the energy crisis. We must make full use of our European power. As Alexander De Croo, the Belgian Prime Minister, said, we can't get by with any solar players now. It's time to tackle this crisis. President, thank you. And now the Vice President of Parliament, Heidi Hautala, will have the floor for 1 minute.
Dear colleagues, there are clear signs that Putin is in a state of weakness in his war. He also risks to be defeated in Russian society. By the chaotic and arbitrary mobilization, he dismissed the social contract with Russian people. That vast majority of Russians who have until now remained indifferent to Putin's war now have been politicized. Many of them now see that the target of Putin's war is also Russian people. Against all odds, Also, the normally obedient media is criticising the failures of Putin. But by threatening Ukraine and the whole world with nuclear weapons, a point has been reached where calls for regime change are more than legitimate. They should not be any more a taboo for anyone inside nor outside Russia. Now, we must stand by the side of the Russian democratic forces, also those who have had to leave Russia. They never gave up their fight for the democratic future of Russia, even during the ever-growing repression. So now is the time when we can make a change, working together with these democratic forces.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you. The next speaker is Jack Madison for 1.5 minutes.
Mr. President, unfortunately, Ms. von der Leyen has left. At least we have a commissioner here. First of all, of course, I can agree with most of you, who have told before in the last 1 hour, that we have to support Ukraine, that Russia is aggressor. That's absolutely true. There is no doubt about that. But the main question is that how we can go forward. What are the next steps? What we can do for Ukraine? As much as I know, we still import oil from Russia. We still are paying millions of euros every day to Russia. We're still continuing this. We are still waiting with a bigger military help to Ukraine. I know exactly in the fact that there is a deal to give more military support to Ukraine, but there is just one signature missing by Mr. Scholz from Germany. Only his signature is missing to give more military support to Ukraine by the German companies. Now it's the question that, okay, we can blame Hungary. Yes, also they are pretty much wrong sometimes. We can blame some other countries. But in the meantime, we are just waiting for German Chancellor to give that one signature to give more military support to Ukraine. And about the blackmailing, what Russians are doing now. Of course, now they are losing territories every day in Ukraine, and that's amazing. We like this. But now they're blackmailing with the nuclear power. And I can see, even in the Western world, that how more and more people are getting really afraid, that maybe they're really so crazy that they will start a nuclear war. Maybe they will really try to do this. But finally the question is, okay, if they're really ready to do this, it will be the suicide of Russia. Because finally, in the end of the day, they will lose this war, even in the nuclear war. And we are not in this position to say to Russians that, okay, let's sit down and have a diplomacy. Because Russians ended diplomacy in the morning of 24 February. In this case today, we have to win in this war in every price. Thank you so much.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you. The next speaker is from Veronika Vrecionová. She has 1.5 minutes.
Děkuji za slovo. Musíme vytrvat v pomoci.
Thank you very much. We have to continue to provide support to Ukraine to preserve peace and security in Europe. The energy crisis is having an effect on different countries in different ways, but we shouldn't allow ourselves to be divided by this. This is obviously Russia's objective, and we certainly shouldn't give up. We shouldn't be afraid of Russian Putin's threats. We have to respect the territorial integrity of Ukraine, and we have to help them to fight against Russian aggression. The threats from the Russian dictator, the falsified referendums, the attempts to integrate Ukrainian territory in the Russian Federation, these are all pieces of evidence that military support to Ukraine is working. Putin has noted that Ukraine can liberate its own territory. And so he stepped up his actions by mobilising, by transferring other military units closer to the conflict zone. Putin cannot win this war, and we can help him lose it. So we have to continue to provide support to Ukraine, and we have to show unity.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you. The next speaker is Silvia Modig. She has 2 minutes.
Arvoisa puhemies, Venäjän aggressiot
Thank you, President. This Russian aggression continues against international law. We cannot backpedal, on our efforts to support Ukraine. Inquiries have to be made into what happened regarding the sabotage of the gas pipelines. We must make sure that all critical infrastructures are protected from potential sabotage. Russia is using this energy crisis to win the day. You will have noted the price rises, which are purely speculative. It's a weapon that Putin is wielding against us. At this point, we need to take the necessary steps to ensure that we get through this winter and we come out of it intact. The energy economy is ever more important in this context. It seems to me that the conditions are there for us to take action. We must be united with our sanctions on Russia, but also in capping gas prices. There were these sham referendums carried out, decided on by the Russians, but that's just a smokescreen. When all's said and done, those areas are being liberated by the Ukrainian army and will return to Ukrainian rule. We must continue our support to the Ukrainians, as I was saying. We must give them fresh hope. That help needs to be financial and military too. We also need to make sure that dissident Russians who want nothing to do with this war are able to enter European territory safely. Lastly, we have to tackle this nuclear threat. It's a threat to the whole planet. It's just making conflict even worse. So let's take the necessary steps to remove that threat.
Muito obrigado.
The President, thank you. The next speaker is Martin Djunjeshi. He has 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, the war in the Ukraine has triggered exemplary European unity, but it has also shown that Europe is powerless, which is quite remarkable if we consider the aggregate size of our national armies, the aggregate volume of our national defense budgets, and the abundance of weapon systems and capacities within the EU. But now it should be clear to all of us that sanctions are essential to limit Russian aggression, but they are certainly not sufficient to win a war. The past weeks have shown how dangerous external dependence on energy can become. It is high time to realize the risks inherent in the eternal dependence on the US to guarantee European security. With Trump's 4 years in office and the dreadful prospect of his return for a second term should be alarming for all of us. So my question to you, Mr. Šefčovič, as the last representative of the Commission in this room today, what are the Commission's plans and proposals for the protection of European citizens from an escalating conflict? Thank you very much.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you. The next speaker is Radosław Sikorski. 1 minute.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Putin, all you have achieved with your bogus annexations is that Ukraine will no longer negotiate with you. Your situation is very precarious. You can no longer win, but you still have some room for maneuver. A previous ruler of Russia, Nicholas II, also attacked what was perceived as a weaker adversary, Japan, in 1904, and also lost, both on land and at sea. He concluded a peace, instituted internal reforms, and gained himself 12 more years in power. Mr. Putin, you probably won't do it because you're more of an egomaniac than a patriot, and you'll probably end up in some bunker. Steiner will not come, and you will go down. The choice is yours. Thank you.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you. The next speaker is Sven Mikser. 2 minutes.
Mr. President.
Issa nisimgħu minn Sven Mikser. President.
Reveals Russia's strategic failure. By his mobilization, his illegal annexation, and his nuclear saber-rattling, is desperately trying to raise the stakes so as to scare Ukrainians and their allies. But Ukrainians are not going to be intimidated by Putin's bluster, and neither should we. Ukrainians' courage and resolve in defending their homeland has been amazing throughout the conflict. But the recent success on the battlefield also owes to the support they have received and continue to receive from allies in Europe and elsewhere. In order to consolidate the recent gains, Ukraine needs much more of our support. Sure, we all want peace to come to Ukraine as quickly as possible, but to be durable and sustainable, it will have to be a just peace. And in case of this war, this means the full restoration of Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. After Putin's sham referenda and declaration of annexation of Ukraine's sovereign territory, the restoration of Ukraine's territorial integrity effectively means driving the occupiers out by force. The faster this happens, the sooner a just and durable peace returns to Ukraine. Yes, Europe has done a lot, but now is not time for self-congratulation. For we have done much, but not enough, whether we compare our performance to that of the Americans or to our own previous commitments. We must not hesitate, and we must not be afraid to give Ukraine all the weapons, including tanks, that they need to successfully complete the liberation of the country. Quick and decisive liberation of all Ukraine's territory is the quickest path to a lasting peace, and is thus actually de-escalatory. As to those who aspire a diplomatic approach, I would say this: yes, when the liberation of all of Ukraine has been made irreversible, then we will indeed have a lot to discuss at the negotiating table, including how to make sure that all those responsible for war crimes are brought to justice, and also the issue of what needs to become of Russia so that it can never again slaughter innocent people and threaten international peace. Thank you.
Muito obrigado. Próxima.
Thank you. The next speaker is our Vice President, Michal Šimečka. 1 minute.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Vladimir Putin is losing his aggressive and brutal war. And the attacked Ukraine, together with Europe, which helps Ukraine militarily and financially, are winning. Let us not get misled or frightened by Putin's threats of using nuclear weapons or by his massive mobilization, where we see more Russians fleeing than joining it, or let's not get frightened by illegal annexation of territories where Putin is gradually losing control over it, because this is the only Putin's tactic. The only weapon he has is to spread fear, blackmail everyone, massacre civilians, burn land, manipulate energy prices, and endanger Europe's critical infrastructure. But in reality, he is weak. If Ukraine and Europe should win this war, we must stay united. We must adopt harder sanctions and continue delivery heavy armory to Ukraine. The victory of Ukraine will be also the victory of free and democratic Europe. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll give the floor now to Bronis Rope. 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colleagues, now high-ranking EU officials keep mentioning regrets that previous warnings of the Baltic states about Russian plans fell on deaf ears. But what's the meaning of these words, of these regrets, if the situation today remains almost unchanged? The introduction of new sanctions is losing pace. Atrocious crimes by Russian militaries cause less and less emotions. In the end, Europe is only reacting to the acts of Putin instead of taking proactive steps in advance of a new attack. Have no doubt, ever since launching the war in Ukraine in 2014, the Kremlin has been sticking to its goals. Talking to an aggressor is useless, and phone calls appealing to common sense and diplomacy bear no fruit at all. We have to understand that common sense is non-existent in the Kremlin, and we have to act correspondingly. Thank you.
Muito obrigado. A próxima intervenção.
Thank you. The next speaker is Peter Kofod, 1.5 minutes.
Tak for det, formand. Da Rusland...
Thank you, President. When Ukraine was attacked, everyone thought it wouldn't last long, but that's not what happened. The situation has changed fundamentally. Things are not going well for Russia on the battlefield. The Russians never won swiftly. The way the Ukrainians are pushing the Russian forces back show how ineffective they are, and the soldiers don't seem to be very motivated, if at all. And whence the need to mobilise more soldiers. Many of the conscripts consequently leaving Russian territory. Putin has underestimated Ukraine and ignored the action from the West. Sanctions are not going to disappear. They will remain, and I support them, and I call for far more of them. Before the beginning of the war, many leaders weren't listening to the Poles and people from the Baltic republics who were warning of the threats of working with Putin. There are those in the West still talking to Putin. Russia needs to learn. It must be aware of the consequences of unmotivated attacks on a peaceful neighbour. Europe must reduce its dependency on Russia, and it must also provide some motivation for the Ukrainians, allowing them to push the Russians out of occupied territory. The West must not cede an inch to Putin now or ever in the future. Thank you.
Muito obrigado. Próximo.
Thank you. The next speaker is Jacek Zariusz-Wolski. 1 minute.
Russia's war against Ukraine has started in 2014, and some woke up to it only this year. While we in Central Eastern Europe were screaming about the growing danger of Russia's imperial appetite, others in the EU were supporting Russia with generous military and energy contracts. It was a fatal mistake with heavy repercussions and losses. Today, many recognise Poland, Baltics and other countries, frontline countries, were right but not listened to. Today, the same people continue not to listen and not to follow informed advice of Central East European countries. The frontline Central European countries were the only, besides US and UK, to give immediately a big part of their effort and budget to support Ukraine's fight and to receive, this time, true refugees. EU did not help adequately frontline member states. Many in the EU, even now, are opposing to send military equipment and disburse already promised money, not to mention increase. It is our urgent imperative and duty to give more heavy weapons and more finance and join the US initiative of monthly 1.5 billion transfers to Ukraine budget, to put to zero and sanction Russia, to enforce payment of reparations to Ukraine, and finally to accept Ukraine in NATO. Thank you.
Muito obrigado. Próxima.
Thank you. The next speaker is Katerina Konieczna. 1 minute.
Thank you very much, President, Vice President of the Commission, Representative of the Council, ladies and gentlemen. The time for playing with words is over. The conflict in Eastern Europe has now really entered our homes and is threatening to attack the quality of life of people in Europe throughout the winter. And the danger of nuclear war has increased as well. And at the moment, the Czech government, the European Union and NATO are doing nothing but adding more fuel to the fire. There's a crazy competition of who is going to provide more weapons in this fratricidal war, who's going to show more courage in fighting to the last Ukrainian. The recent terrorist attacks on gas pipelines from Russia to Germany didn't just damage the interests and property of these two countries, but also threaten social peace throughout Europe. And the various approaches of the West and Washington, Berlin, vis-à-vis Ukraine, is showing we are divided. And maybe you remember what US President Joe Biden said at the beginning of February when he threatened to terminate Nord Stream in the presence of the German Chancellor. So I call on the EU institutions to use their influence, take the initiative, start conducting peace negotiations, and that is the only way to lead to the end of this conflict, and the sooner the better.
Thank you. Francesca Donato is the next speaker for 1 minute. Thank you, President. News from the front tells us that Ukraine is winning the war. Are we sure that Putin will agree to the losses without stepping up the level? The nuclear threat is becoming ever more probable. General Petraeus, the former head of the CIA, has talked in terms of triggering the Third World War. But those you call populists in Europe want peace talks, but Zelensky and the European Union are saying no. Now, what I wonder is this. Will the European Union survive this war? I really don't think it will. Because we have to ask ourselves when the bombs are going to start falling on our cities. Are we going to do what Mr. Sikorsky did when the gas line was bombed? He said, thank you, US. Shouldn't we also be saying thank you to EU? At least that's what our citizens will say. Let's carefully think through how many human lives and businesses we want to sacrifice. I would ask you, please, let's end this madness. Thank you. The next speaker is Siegfried Mureşan. 1 minute.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, the first and most important thing is to observe and recognize reality on the ground. And reality is that Ukraine is winning this war, Russia is losing this war, and Russia knows it. Russia is answering with aggressiveness, and Russia is answering with propaganda, and our first important duty is to tell the truth to the people of Europe, to make sure that the people of Europe are properly informed. We have to tell to the people that Russia is failing militarily, it is failing politically, economically, and it is failing morally. What do? We have to stay united, we have to help each other within the European Union, we have to help our neighbouring countries, we have to help Ukraine, and we have to continue sanctioning Russia. Sanctions work, there are no more investments into Russia, Russia has no more access to our top technologies, and next year it will have no more revenues from gas and fossil fuels from us. We saw last week that Russia is trying to also affect our immediate neighbouring countries. It cut by 30% the gas supplies to the Republic of Moldova, an EU candidate country. We have to help there, and Commissioner, Vice President, amounts which are small for us make a big difference and will help keep the Republic of Moldova, an EU candidate country, on the European path. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is Tonino Pizzola. 2 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. More than 7 months since the start of its aggression, things are not going as planned for Russia. What was supposed to be a quick special military operation turned into a long battle where Ukrainian forces showed exceptional bravery and even started to advance. The pipeline that was a significant source for financing for Russian aggression is sabotaged. In desperation, Kremlin began to mobilise. I believe that once again this House will confirm a strong text resolution, and this lead the way for future actions. Our demands and suggestions are precise. We want and ask for another robust package of sanctions targeting anyone involved in this illegal referenda, as we will never recognise its so-called results. Coordinated actions on the visa and asylum applications of the Russian citizens, and concrete proposals for advanced military support. I would also like to reflect on the great sense of unity permanently shown by this House since the start of the Russian aggression on Ukraine. One of the most critical tasks is maintaining unity among our governments and citizens as well. We have to be clear and say the origin of all problems that our citizens are dealing with High energy prices, food supply problems and security threats are caused by the actions of the Russian regime. The firmer we are with our sanctions, the sooner they will end. And the change in Russia should come from within. Therefore, we should increase our support to those in Russia who raise their voices against the Putin regime and can be the drivers of this change. This war will end Putin's regimes. Slava Ukraini!
Muito obrigado. Próximo.
Thank you. The next speaker is Bernard Guetta for 1 minute.
Mes chers collègues, ladies and gentlemen, the question we need to put today is to ask ourselves where we are. Well, on the Ukrainian side, the counter-offensive is being crowned with a massive success because the advances to the east are now seeing where liberating troops are heading towards Kherson. On the Russian side, on the contrary, we can see a political debacle added to the military debacle. The highest echelons of the regime are starting to accuse one another of negligence in the harsh light of the public eye. And this has never happened before. Russia's chain of command and Putin himself, we can see, are no longer untouchable. And it's the start of this general disintegration we saw with the partial mobilisation, first signs of emancipation of Central Asia, the success that our sanctions are having, and the rather strange and persistent assertion from Mr. Prigozhin, boss of a powerful militia who's nurturing his own ambitions. The sun is setting on an aging Tsar, but at this time he is more dangerous, but he will still lose.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you. The next speaker is our colleague Viola von Kramon-Tavedel. 1 minute.
Mr. President, Commissioner, colleagues, Putin is neither a master strategist nor a geopolitical genius. He is a terrorist who is only capable of bombing children and blackmailing us with doomsday. In these efforts, useful idiots are his main asset. These useful idiots, and there are plenty, from politicians to tech entrepreneurs, should not be allowed to define the narrative. The chaotic mobilization of troops and threatening the world with nuclear weapons only prove one thing. Putin is desperate. Desperate because he's losing the war that he vowed to win in 3 days. Desperate because his sanctions are biting and his propaganda cannot outweigh the empty Russian fridges for long. Desperate because he hears the voices of mutiny in the Kremlin corridors getting louder and louder. Putin is Russia's greatest enemy and his end is in sight. Until then, we will continue standing firmly with Ukraine, arm them with heavy weapons, support the EU initiative for tanks, so that its brave people finally win this war. Thank you.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you. The next speaker is Gilles Le Breton for 1.5 minutes. Colleagues, in the light of a war, international law calls for the aggressor to be condemned and the aggressed party to be defended. I therefore decry the invasion of Ukraine and the annexation by Russia of 4 Ukrainian regions. It's an unacceptable attack on the territorial sovereignty, the territorial integrity of a sovereign state. This is a fundamental rule of international law. From Aristide Briand back to Victor Hugo, those who've defended a peaceful society of nations have always rejected the use of armed force. These demands have to be directed at Russia, first of all, and its president, who went for armed aggression against a neighbouring country. But they also have to be directed to the president of the European Commission, who recently came along to tell us that only a military outcome could end this dramatic conflict, which is tearing European peoples apart. No, the European Union should not give in to wild warmongering. This war can only be brought to an end by ceasefire negotiations. The war camp in Brussels must stop this crazy escalation following Washington's orders to humiliate Russia. As General de Gaulle said, I want a multipolar Europe where Europe will be a power for peace rather than being the footstool for an omnipotent America. Thank you.
Muito obrigado. Próximo.
Thank you. The next speaker, Nicola Procaccini. 1 minute.
Thank you, President. This war, unfortunately, involves us all indirectly in terms of the military and economically. So we shouldn't commit two mistakes. We shouldn't make our choices alone, particularly when it comes to energy, the gas price cap and the electricity price cap, if they are to come along in the next few days, are too late for businesses and families in Italy and in Europe. There's a need to act quickly. The second mistake we should avoid is division internally. The political campaign against certain conservative governments is a real injustice, hitting those European states which are bearing the brunt of the geopolitical crisis. I'm Italian, and I know which government is in the firing line, but I hope the left's hatred for democracy will not be greater than Putin's hatred for democracy, but allow me to be rather pessimistic on that score.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you. The next speaker is Andrea Bocskor. 1 minute.
Tisztelt elnök úr!
Thank you, President. 224 days of war that taking the toll among citizens and children, and more than 10 million people were forced to leave their homes. The Fidesz group in this parliament has condemned and condemns the Russian aggression and the annexation of Ukrainian territories and war crimes committed. Since the beginning, we have been in support of the integrity of Ukraine, and we do not accept the results of the fake referenda. Hungary's history's largest humanitarian aid program is going on, and we have received more than 1 million refugees from the Ukraine. Our interest is a peace which observes the integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine. Only this can stop the suffering of war. Only this can stop this raging of madness. It is unacceptable, on the other hand, to connect the solidarity of the Ukrainians with the full energy sanctions against Russia, because this divides Europe, and the sanctions, the energy sanctions, are contradictory.
Thank you very much. It's now my pleasure to give the floor to Vice President Otmar Karas.
President, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen. Resolution, unity and solidarity, security and support. Those are the orders of the day. I had an opportunity last week to represent the Parliament and go to Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, to carry out discussions. My working visit arrived on the same day that Putin decided to annex and announce further areas of Ukraine. With these unacceptable injustices and irresponsible, worrying decisions that he's taken, the illegal, bogus referendums, the nuclear threat and mobilization, in all this, Putin is stepping more and more close to escalation. He's turning up the pressure. Now, the persistence and resolution and resilience of the Ukrainians have surprised me and encouraged me. So that's why I support increasing sanctions and the package of measures from the Commission, and I also support the measures that the President of the Commission announced to us today to reorganize the energy market, to make sure that the price mechanism is brought in that will help.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you. The next speaker is our colleague Vladimir Timoshevich. 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Russia continues its centuries-long tradition of conquering new lands and other nations. It neglects the fact that it is a brutal breach of international law. Being an economic dwarf, feeling that in the future its main sources of wealth will lose much of their present significance, it wants to strengthen its international position with use of force. Having little to say in scientific and technological competition, Russian leaders, supported by many ordinary people, want other nations to feel fear. Then there is a personal obsession of their leader, who would like very much to rebuild something similar to the Soviet Union. Aggression against Ukraine is a step in this direction. This is a major violation of law. Aggressors are responsible for a terrible number of killed people, demolished cities and villages, bombarded infrastructure. To hide compromising battle failures, they decided to officially steal part of Ukraine and threaten the rest of the world with use of nuclear arms. We all, not only Europeans, must understand that this is equal to the final termination of life on Earth. Giving up is not an option. It will not stop Russia. The only thing we can and should do is to support the victim, Ukraine, as much as possible and as much as needed to defeat an aggressor and to show that we are able to defend life, law and liberty. Thank you.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you. The next speaker, Cholos, 1 minute.
Cred că în ultimele luni atât noi cât și ca și reprezentanți.
Thank you very much. I think in recent months we, but also representatives of the citizens and those who lead the EU institutions have learned an important word, courage. We have been standing by the side of Ukraine in this criminal and unjustified and unprovoked war started by Putin from the beginning. We've supported Ukraine. We've supported them with wheat exports. We've taken in refugees. It's important that the EU show this courage. And we've seen results, actually. The Russian fronts are crumbling in many areas, and we've seen the courage of Ukrainians as well. We have to make sure that we provide support around the world to maintain independence and territorial integrity. We have to keep up that those measures. Freedom and democracy are important. Those are part and parcel of the values that the Union was created on, and it's important that we continue with that, continue to show courage. And as long as we have courage, no dictator will be able to cling to power, not even Putin.
Muito obrigado.
Thank you. The next speaker is Yannick Jadot for 1 minute.
Chers collègues.
Dear colleagues, of course, today we need to step up these sanctions and all the assistance to Ukraine to obtain Ukraine's military victory and the end of atrocities. The High Representative said that what is at stake is a conflict of values, of civilization. But this conflict of this clash of civilization and values is really at the heart of European society as well. And this has an effect on European unity. Look at the far right. Let's look at their friendship with Putin, the social injustices, which really go to serve their vision and values. Look at the increase in prices as well, and the decoupling between gas and electricity prices is something which has come too slowly. You need to act more quickly. And the windfall tax as well. We're talking about 2.6 billion going to shareholders. That's more than France's budget for heat renovation. If there's no social justice in this work for the climate, in the work we're doing for Ukraine, we will lose when it comes to this clash of values.
Muito obrigado. Segue-se agora a intervenção de Harald Wilinski, 1 minuto e 30.
Danke sehr. Mit den Sanktionen.
Yes, we can see that the sanctions crazy idea is being professed once again from the conservative left majority, the Commission, Greens, Social Democrats, Conservatives. They are going to really run this continent to the wall. Look at how people are coping. There's record inflation. There's people who are losing their businesses. There's poverty. People don't know how they're going to get through the winter. And the advice is, well, just stop heating. Turn it off. Just freeze through the winter. I think this is a ridiculous path to take that leads to an abyss. And we need to see this from a humanitarian point of view. We are living through difficult times, and there are voices who are calling for peace in these times. It's not the evil right that you always invoke. We hear speeches where people who are, such as business people, one of the most successful businessmen in the world, Elon Musk, for example, and also the Pope, all asking us to sit down at the table and try and stop the killing so that in Europe we can maintain prosperity, that we can make it through the winter with our heating so that people don't need to freeze, people aren't scared of losing their jobs and their prosperity running into the sand and their savings to be lost to record inflation and this continent to be dragged down into further, deeper problems. I can only once again appeal to you to speak with a strong European voice. I am concluding. The warring factions need to be forced to the negotiating table and find a common solution that everybody can accept. Thank you.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne a ďalší v rozprave vystúpi pán.
Thank you very much. And now Alexander Vondra, you have the floor.
Ladies and gentlemen, today I will be positive because we have a quality resolution ahead of us which contains all important elements. Our reminder that Russia bears the full responsibility for the war, our reiteration of the full support for Ukraine, including our call to increase the massive military assistance, and also calling to explore the possibility for Lend-Lease military assistance, something what I have already proposed during the last plenary. Also, we are rightly condemning the so-called referenda to annex the 4 Ukrainian regions as illegal and illegitimate. And last but not least, we are also condemning the recent Russian threats to use nuclear weapons as irresponsible and dangerous, and calling that we would not be deterred by our further assistance to Ukraine and self-defense. That's all good. Maybe one thing is missing here, and that's to designate that threatening the use of force, the nuclear force, should be labelled or designed as a threat against peace and humanity. So let's work on that because it's unprecedented rhetoric by Putin.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne.
Thank you very much. The next one is Mr. Lefteros. Nikolaou Avavanos, you have the floor.
Η προσάρτηση ουκρανικών εδαφών.
The annexation of Ukrainian territories that President Putin announced means that we have more oil in the fire of this imperialist war. And of course we have the support to Mr. Zelensky with new materiel. So we have a conflict between Eurasianism and the Asian bloc with Russia, China, but within the Eurozone as well, between Germany, France and Italy. So the threats from both sides for the use of nuclear weapons, the sabotage of the pipelines means that the peoples in Ukraine and the whole world pay a high price. Under these conditions, Greece must move away from this war and the NATO plans for war. So we need to stop right now sending materiel to Ukraine, and we should no longer use Greek territory for a staging ground for this war. And so in each and every country we need to do everything to stop this war.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne. Ďalšie.
Thank you very much. And the next one is Ms. Dolores Montserrat. You have the floor.
Presidente. Thank you, President. Putin is continuing his war escalation, calling up reservists, the illegal referenda. Europe needs a firm response with sanctions on Russia, with no beating about the bush. This is a war criminal we're talking about here. When there's a criminal war there, you can't give way at all. But we also have to tackle inflation, the impact on prices. We need an urgent reply for families and small firms. They can't make ends meet. In Spain, we used to be one of the cheapest. Now we're one of the most expensive countries in Europe. Producers are tripling their energy prices. Citizens are already saving energy, not because we're asking them to do so, it's because they can't actually pay for it. In Spain, while families are economically struggling, the government will get an extra 30 billion euro because of inflation than last year. That money should be returned to citizens' pockets. You have to bring down taxes so that millions of families and firms do not face ruin.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne. Ďalšia v rozprave vystúpi.
Thank you very much. And now Mrs. Helen Fritzon, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, President, Commission, Council. Russia's terrible war is affecting the Ukrainian population every single day, and it's threatening peace in Europe and security in Europe as well. Now that Russia is escalating the war, we Social Democrats believe that the Commission's calls for unity and solidarity are decisive, and that Commissioner Johansson's guidelines on the visas are reasonable. In this particular security situation, we think that the leaks that have happened in Nord Stream 1 and 2 in the Baltic Sea need to be investigated properly. This presumable attack of sabotage have happened in Swedish and Danish economic zones. That's very serious, just a few miles from where I live. Putin's cold-blooded actions in Ukraine and the illegal annexes have to be stopped. We in the EU have to continue our strong cooperation, because one thing is sure, Putin will not come out of this victorious. Thank you.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne. Ďalší.
Thank you very much. The next one is Mr. Ilyan Kuchuk. You have the floor.
Colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, Europe has done a tremendous job. Europe has done a lot of things, including military support, financial support, but it's not a time for self-celebration. We must continue our support to brave Ukrainians who are fighting not only for their designation, for their identity and belonging, but they are fighting for us, for Europeans, for European values. And they deserve our admiration and great support under the leadership of President Zelensky and certainly the brave Ukrainians. Secondly, we have to resist. And every time Europe is tested by foreign actors, by big powers, by invaders, this time I think there is a greater test of our unity. We have to resist and put together the European Union, because only if we are able to come together, we will be able to overcome the crisis. And indeed, there are many, starting from energy and ending by social consequences of the crisis. But one thing is clear, unity is the key. Unity within the Council, but also unity within the European institutions. So let's unite Europe as never before.
Ďakujem veľmi.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Mr. Jakob Dalunde. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, President. Putin maintains that the population in Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson and Zaporizhia have freely chosen in the so-called referendums, but they are against international law. It is a lie. Just as the annex of the Crimea back in 2014 at the start of this war, Russia's annexing territories in Ukraine are a crime against international law. And the list of war crimes that Putin's been accused of is becoming longer and longer. The attacks on Ukrainian populations are hardly even mentioned on the front pages of newspapers anymore. We cannot allow this war to disappear into the background. The energy crisis is something that will affect Europe this winter, but it's not the worst thing. War is the worst thing. Our brothers and sisters in Ukraine are paying the ultimate price every day, and every day Europe doesn't take those steps and stop buying fossil fuels from Russia. We have to stop.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne. Ďalší v rozprave vystúpi pán.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Dominik Tarczynski. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. We should have listened to Poland. Ursula von der Leyen said during her State of the Union speech. She says we should listen to Poland. We should have listened to Poland. But you didn't want to listen. You didn't want to listen about Nord Stream. You didn't want to listen about illegal migration. You didn't want to listen about Putin. And you didn't want to listen about sanctions. Sanctions. What about Russian diamonds? Why there is no embargo on Russian diamonds? Why? Because the capital of the diamonds industry, Antwerp in Belgium, would be unhappy, isn't it? Why there is no sanctions on the Russian diamonds? Nord Stream is destroyed, but the diamonds are making money for Russia. So stop lecturing Poland, stop pointing us with your finger, stop lecturing us about democracy, do not be a hypocrite, take actions, not a beautiful words. Be like Poland, be brave, believe in your own nations instead of being dependent on Russian rubles. Be brave, be like Poland. Thank you.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Mr. Mislav Kolakušić. You have the floor.
Poštovane kolege.
Ladies and gentlemen, citizens, we need to look at these political relationships between the superpowers of Russia and SAD has to be analyzed objectively. If we did that, we could have prevented the war. If Mexico had decided to support the Russian Federation and place nuclear missiles on the border with the United States, what would be the reaction of the United States? Sanctions. We had 70 years of historical experience how sanctions influence the attempt to depose democratically elected leaders. 70 years after introducing the economic sanctions to Cuba and to the North Korea, so today, 7 decades later, the same dynasties are still in power. Did we not learn anything? We have to turn to diplomacy. War will only lead to nuclear war, and it will lead to the death of hundreds of millions of people. We have to use our historic experiences and turn to peace.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne. Ďalší v rozprave vystúpi.
Thank you very much. And now the next one is Andrej Kovačov. You have the floor.
Господин председател, Украина се сражава храбро.
Thank you. Ukraine is fighting valiantly since the start of the war back in 2014, regardless of their ethnic origin. Ukrainian citizens are valiantly fighting for their country, and all Kremlin expectations for a blitz victory are failing, and Ukraine counter-offensive force putting into some senseless steps undermining international and moral norms, annexing illegally territories of a neighboring country which has independence and whose borders are UN recognized. So there is a threat of nuclear action, which is further blackmail. The EU member states have to continue their massive military, financial, intelligence, economic, infrastructure, medical, humanitarian support for Ukraine. It is important that Ukraine's desire to join NATO has to be respected, but it is shameful that the former Bulgarian government did not support the sending of military equipment to Ukraine. And colleagues from the left, you did not let this happen. It is lamentable that Bulgaria did not join the Central and Eastern European countries on Ukraine. Thank you.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne. Ďalší v rozprave.
Thank you very much. And now, Juozas Olekas, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Baimės, bet kartu jie buvo pilni Ukrainos žmonių ir jų sąjungininkų susitelkimo ir ryžto nepasiduoti agresijai ir prievartai. Agresijos praeitą savaitę vykdyti priverstiniais.
Пожалуйста, нема превода.
Pagal civilizuoto pasaulio taisyklės. Kolegos, išgirskit. Putinas ir jo aplink.
I'm sorry, Mr.
So the only way to solve this conflict, to liberate the occupied territories of Ukraine, is to continue to provide even more weapons to Ukraine. Lastly, lately, Putin, just like an angry and raging bull, has been brandishing the nuclear threat. The West has to be unequivocal in stating that should this happen, Russia would erode and eradicate all the taboos set since the Cold War, and all the Russian targets, both in the occupied Ukraine and in the territory of Russia, including Putin's underground bunkers, would actually become the target of a retaliatory state. Let's stay united and let's show our solidarity. Slava Ukraini.
I was told that the interpretation has not been working for parts of the time. Has it worked toward the end? No. You should probably check this. Ďalšia v rozprave vystúpi pani Roža Thun-Hohenstein, and we're going to be sure to fix the interpretation. Prosím, máte slovo.
Putin, in fact, is what we witness in this very room. We were never as united as during this debate. And this unity from one debate to another is more and more visible. Even Alexander Vondra was positive this time. There are, of course, some shameful exceptions, but they are not even worth mentioning them. The determination of our leaders to support Ukraine is also more clear from day to day, week to week, month to month, than what we heard from Roberta Metsola, Josep Borrell, Ursula von der Leyen, is one voice, or the voices that complete each other. Member states, citizens, we all must follow. It is not even those words, it is not only words, because they became facts, actions, or very clear plans for the future. And of such a European Union, I am really proud. Only so, by strengthening our policies, we strengthen also our sovereignty. Not only we need to be sovereign, but also Ukraine needs a strong, united, sovereign, ready to pay the price, because we know that otherwise the price will be much higher. Thank you.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne. Ďalší v rozprave vystúpi.
Thank you very much. And now, Pier Nicola Pedicini, the floor is yours.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, I think that this time people are really very fearful. They're afraid because they can see that this escalation is not wanted by just one side, but both. So they're not just afraid of Putin and his threats, they're also afraid of us Westerners. Let me read you a statement by Biden released in February before the Russian invasion. If Russia invades Ukraine, we will destroy Nord Stream, make sure it no longer exists. Well, look, those declarations are scaring, because you can't see where they want to get with this. You can't really see either what the European Union really wants to do, given that no head of state or government has really made any step towards peace. The European Union, I think, should be playing the role of a third party to end this war in everyone's interest. The only head of state who's been brave enough to say something in this direction is the Pope. Putin must stop the war, and Zelensky should be open to serious peace proposals. So I would urge you, let's at least listen to what the Pope has to say.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Madam Asita Kanko. The floor is yours.
Thank you, President, colleagues. The EU and NATO is contributing to an escalation and spiral of the event, sabotage of pipelines, the use of energy as a weapon against ourselves, illegal annexing of territory, and now threats of nuclear war. Putin has been carrying out a hybrid war for a long time. We're only starting to wake up to that, and that lies are reigning there, that he is not shy of breaking international law, and he is targeting civil infrastructure in his military attacks. And the EU has to go beyond itself now, make it clear to Putin that we will never give in to his blackmail. We know that this crisis is going to affect our energy provision, so we have to ensure that we maintain our critical entities and we deal with security supply of energy. We need to make sure that the war crimes are brought to justice. We should not allow him to move to nuclear war. We have to be resolute in reacting against him. We shouldn't be working against his people, but against his regime. And rather than war, we should have a multilateral, rule-based order that is brought back in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Paolo Rangel. The floor is yours.
Escalada da guerra de Putin.
Thank you. Putin's escalation of the war, mobilising reservists with illegal annexations and nuclear threats, forces the European Union to be more united than ever and support Ukraine systematically. That's why we need to ask ourselves this. The SD, the Greens and the Liberals need to tell us what their position is on the unilateral action of the Scholz government, the Socialist Liberal Green government in Germany, granting 200 billion euros without any coordination, without linking up with the work of the European Union and their partners, subsidising energy, thereby destroying confidence amongst the member states and fragmenting the single market. Yes, I want to ask Irache Sanchez.
The group on Scholz's decision to take action alone, giving 200 billion euros of subsidies against all the coordination with our partners. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I'd like you to limit yourself to the allotted speaking time because we are running a bit late and there's a vote at 12 o'clock. Thank you very much. Prosím, ďalšia vystúpi.
The next speaker is Madam Petra Kumpula-Natri. The floor is yours.
Europe is sharing common understanding, and it's very clear. We stand with Ukraine to help it defend its territory, each quadrat meter, and to stay a sovereign state. We need to make the world to see that any threat to Russians is from their own president. It's not from NATO, EU, Europe. It's the president who will threat their morality, economical stand, and sending men to Ukraine to kill Ukrainians. But in this war in our continent, we also need to protect the rest of Europe. Security is the highest priority. Whether it's energy crisis or is it unbearable prices, lack of energy because of so much reducing energy from Russia. It's cold winter to manage if we don't succeed with the savings too. I welcome the words from the Commission President to raise the protection of all the critical infrastructure. And also I welcome the words and general guidelines for visa assurance statement Commission took that every member state should take into account the security when issuing visas to Russians. Thank you.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Elsi Katainen. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner, Minister. Sabotage on the pipeline, illegal referendums and annexations in Europe, repeated mass murders, threats of nuclear weapons. We know who are behind these atrocities. And apart from us pointing fingers at each other, we need to resolve this crisis in Europe. And the quicker we do that, the greater the number of winners will be. This crisis has to show us that we can't be dependent on dictators anymore. European autarky is extremely important. We need to have a green transition, but that can't be the only truth. We also have to make sure that we have energy security. And that means we need to have a broad range of the energy mix. Bioenergy is something that shouldn't be restricted, for example. The worse Russia stoops, the more united we need to be, whether that be on energy use or visa policies. We have to make sure we are not split.
The next speaker is Mr. Kaff.
Cold winter lies ahead for Putin and his cronies. And Russia's attempts this week to illegally annex 4 regions in Ukraine have been rightfully condemned. This is an age of hybrid warfare, and the Nord Stream attacks reminds us that we are vulnerable. I'm encouraged by the plan presented by the Commission, the President this morning, to protect our critical infrastructure. But I am concerned about the security of our infrastructure, our underground cables, particularly off the coast of my own country, Ireland. These cables are crucial to the functioning of Europe's digital services. And a recent report found that the Irish Defence Forces cannot adequately protect them. So we need to urgently invest in our defence capacity, on cyber security and on defending our crucial infrastructure at this perilous time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Andres Kubilius. The floor is yours.
Dear colleagues, first of all, of course, congratulations to victorious Ukrainians. It is clear that the end of the war depends only on how much weapons the West delivers to Ukraine. In some way, it's a shame for EU that the United States delivered 25 billion euros value of weapons, and the whole European Union support, together with all the member states, is only less than 6 billion euros. The same is with financial aid. The European Union is heavily behind United States assistance. It's not enough of our solidarity statements. Real EU money are needed. Sanctions are working, but the most painful next sanction on Putin would be immediate creation of special tribunal on crime of aggression, which would target directly Putin. Ukrainian military performance is above all the NATO standards. Not Ukraine should ask for NATO membership, but NATO should ask Ukraine to join, because Ukraine is implementing NATO mission to stop Russia's imperial expanse to the west. We can help Russians to bury their imperial dreams with immediate Ukraine NATO membership and negotiations on EU membership started early next year. We shall show to Russia that Ukraine is gone from imperial grey zone.
Thank you very much. And now Mr. Bonafé.
Thank you, President. More than 7 months have gone by since the Russian army, on Vladimir Putin's orders, began its invasion of Ukraine. And now, in the face of the facts as its plans have collapsed. The Russian regime is acting in an ever more random criminal way. Illegal annexations with sham referendums. Well, what we need to do is get all the main players around the world around the table to work for a fair peace. We're about to have the first meeting of the European political community. And together with NATO, we need a stable project for a secure Europe and an independent Ukraine. Let's move in that direction. A strong, free voice of Europe could be crucial in avoiding escalation with Russia and the US returning to the kind of bipolarization we had in the Cold War. We don't need that again. What we need is courage and ambition. The world has changed, and the European Union has to change too, to work for a lasting peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next one is Mr. Christensen. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chairman. I believe that national states themselves should choose where they belong. This is why it's unacceptable when we see the Russian annexation and their attack from February 24th. We have now also witnessed sabotage close to Denmark and Sweden in the Baltic. During the war, we see war crimes which should not happen in 2022. The Russian aggression has also stopped the export of foodstuffs from Ukraine, and this has had big consequences for third countries. There's also, as a result of the war, an important energy crisis. Prices are rising, and this is very costly for European households and companies. There's a long and cold winter ahead of us. We need to act now. When Putin forces us to turn down the heat, we need to improve our production of coal, gas and shale gas. This is how we protect Europe.
Thank you very much. And the next one next one is Madam Angelika Niebler.
Thank you very much, Chair, Vice President of the Commission, Council Representative, colleagues. The Russian partial mobilization, nuclear threats, the unfair annexation of occupied areas. Putin is increasingly aggressive in his war on aggression. The Ukraine is defending itself bravely, is fighting on its own behalf, but also fighting for our interests. And it needs our full support. And I welcome this 8th sanctions package that you're working on. But the war also affects us here in the EU, and we must do everything we can in order to tackle the spiking energy prices. Households can no longer pay their bills. We have high gas prices, which are driving our private sector to bankruptcy. I welcome the initiatives of the energy ministers. I think that's a good first step, but they need to be implemented quickly and effectively, and additional measures must follow. We need to have a gas price cap without endangering access. Now, this won't solve everything, but it will give us a bit of breathing space in order to tackle the challenges we face. We need to work together on both gas and LNG, and we need to work on the index system for electricity prices as well. As we see, all of this is needed given the current circumstances. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And the next one is Madam Marina Kaljurand. The floor is yours.
Thank you, President.
Colleagues, last weeks have been important. It seems that the war might reach its end phase, and the downfall of Putin is only a matter of time. The question is, when will it happen, and how much harm will the regime be able to do? Our support to Ukraine is more important than ever, together in solidarity and forcefully, even if it means economic difficulties to our people. These are not comparable to the war. For the hesitant, I suggest to go to Ukraine and talk to the people there. We mustn't tire, and we mustn't give in to people who talk about peace at every price. The peace can be achieved only at the conditions of Ukraine, as put in place by President Zelensky. He mentioned 5 conditions, including bringing the perpetrators to justice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next one is Mr. Niels Torvalds. The floor is yours.
The President, Commission, Minister, we actually know how the Russian war against Ukraine will end. It will end in a total moral, societal, economical collapse of Russia, and we already see the first sign of it. But this road to collapse is long and it's lined with untold sufferings and human death. Along this Via Dolorosa marches the Ukrainian army and peoples of Ukraine. In comparison with them, we have a fairly easy walk, but we already complain, sometimes in an unduly manner. Now it's time for us to make some small sacrifices. But making these small sacrifices, we should also be able to open up a perspective for Europe in the future. 47 years ago, the Conference of Security and Cooperation opened in Helsinki. The principles of the final act have then been torn into pieces by Vladimir Putin and Russia. We need a new conference. We need to get Europe on a new path away from the mortal path Russia under Putin has chosen. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next one is Madame Sandra Kalniete. The floor is yours.
Mr. President, Commissioner, Putin's draud ar kodoltriecienu.
Putin threatens the use of nuclear weapons. NATO warns Putin of severe consequences. Ukrainians prepare for nuclear attack. These headlines reflect the escalation caused by the Kremlin. Putin wants to intimidate anybody who stands with Ukraine in its just fight. This cannot happen. Europe cannot again succumb to the illusion that Putin can be engaged in talks, and then he perhaps might renew the gas supply and prevent the winter freeze. Just the other way around, the EU should increase weapon supply to Ukraine so that every next victory would trigger more and more domestic protests, because Russia does not love losers. We have to focus more economic pressure by defining the price ceiling for oil and gas and by blocking the export of nuclear fuel. Our inability to agree on sanctions is shameful and shows that the Putin's escalation is working. Beyond comprehension is the fact that so far, Ukraine has only received one of the promised 9 billion euros. Hopefully, the 5 billion agreed on recently will reach Kyiv in record speed. Slava Ukraini!
Thank you very much. The next one to speak is Mr. Javier Moreno Sanchez. The floor is yours.
Gracias, President. Thank you very much, sir. Putin is losing the war in moral and political terms. The Ukrainian, the very brave Russian young people are saying no to him and leaving the country. The international community is saying no to him. The only thing he's got left is blackmail, psychological blackmail, faced with which, obviously, we have to show solidarity and unity. This means, obviously, there's a cost to be paid by European citizens. We have an energy crisis looming and food insecurity. But what we must do is to make sure that we buy gas collectively and that we have a strategy for this. Green energy and food security is what we need. And look at what happened at the WTO last week. And I would tell Mrs. Montserrat that taxes are good precisely in order to pay for the public services that your party would like to privatize. I may remind you that the forest fires this winter were not paid for by private.
Thank you very much. Next one is Mr. Bart Grotius. The floor is yours.
Dear President, dear Commissioner, dear Minister, thank you, dear colleagues. For the past 10 years, Russia has invested significantly in its capability for deep-sea water research, or the sabotage capability as we know it. For the past 3 years, Russia deliberately disconnected itself from the internet twice without severe consequences for its own economy or society. In the end of this year, internet cables were cut in Norway, Svalbard, where EU Galileo's ground stations are present. And all this time, this House asked for action, swift action. Last week, 2, not 3, 4 times, Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 were sabotaged. And this morning only, President von der Leyen announced a new plan to protect our critical infrastructure below sea. She announced satellite surveillance, stress tests and more cooperation. Well, dear colleagues, that's not even close to what is needed. This House has the ideas what is needed, and we will put them forward in the next couple of months, and we hope to cooperate with you, dear Commissioner. Boost the Maritime Safety Agency in Lisbon. Connect European coast guards, navies, make it into a new paramilitary venue. Place sensors in our water, use industry data. Create PESCO projects to technically update our submarines for this task. And last but not least, attribute. Make sure that every incident is reported, investigated towards the culprit, together with NATO and neighbouring countries. Thank you. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you very much. The next one to speak is Mr. Luděk Niedermayer. The floor is yours.
Mr. Chair, dear colleagues, dear guests, it was great to see such a strong sense of unity here, of all except of very, very few. I guess it's clear what should be our reaction to escalation of the situation and increase of the risks. First, this is political support, at least as strong as was shown today, this morning. The second, economic support. I mean economic sanctions and, as well, obviously, the financial support of Ukraine. We also shouldn't forget on the humanitarian part of the problem. There are millions of people in Ukraine that have lost home, and they can suffer in winter, and they count on our support. I also very much appreciate statements of the Commission on the energy. Very good proposals from the Commission can help us to avoid huge economic risks this winter and later. This is very important. And also keep the social stability that is needed for continuation of current right course of our policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. The next one to speak is Madame Kathleen van Bremt. The floor is yours.
Dank u wel, voorzitter.
Thank you, Chair, colleagues. Ukraine is a free and independent nation. It is a democracy. And it is Putin, and Putin alone, who, with his illegal aggression against Ukraine, has brought war back to the European continent. And the answer to this, colleagues, I think we all agree, must be unity, cooperation, and solidarity. And we've shown that. First, with the broad-based support to Ukraine, but also with the succession of sanctions packages. We need to ensure that we close the tap when it comes to funding Putin's war. And it's for these reasons that I do support adding diamonds to the sanctions packages. And I'm saying this as somebody from Antwerp. Cooperation and solidarity are also needed to tackle the energy crisis. And it would appear that there's a bit of a lack of that today. We talk about solidarity. We see that from the Council. We also need it from the Commission. Commissioner, I've heard some very good things about President von der Leyen this morning. It really is time to convert that into action. Let's set a price cap. Let's uncouple this electricity from gas prices, and that will ensure that true support to European people, that the European people will continue to support Ukraine. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next one to speak is Madame Marie-Pierre Vedren. The floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President, Commissioner, Minister. In the European Parliament, which is the heart of European democracy, we can once again confirm our unstinting support to Ukrainians. We condemn this escalation, as we have condemned all of Vladimir Putin's actions, bringing war back to Europe, organising sham referendums, and Ukrainians are not only fighting for their own freedom, but for democracy itself, European democracy. Following all these months, Ukraine is nonetheless determined. We need to step up to the plate and show the same courage as the people of Ukraine. We should not listen to the propaganda. The 8th sanctions package is vital as a lever to hit the Russian economy. The people of Ukraine are thirsty for freedom. They have expectations, and we need to continue working hand in hand with other democracies in order to consolidate our own strategy and our own support, including supplies. And for that, we need to be united and strong.
Thank you very much. The next one to speak is Mr. Karlo Resner. The floor is yours.
Poštovani potpredsjedniče,
what do we have before us? We have a threat of nuclear war. And the Russians are now using energy, actually, as a weapon. They have weaponized energy against Europe. What have we been hearing around from Mr. Kucic? Unlike that, unlike what he said, history has shown that if we do not stand united, if we give in to tyranny and imperialism, in the end, we will get nothing at all. History has shown that we cannot just take aggression as in an ordinary fashion. Obviously not. We must look at the fact that this is a country, Ukraine, that already 30 years ago had suffered a very similar aggression. What will happen later? After the Ukrainian war is something that's going to fashion a new Europe. This is the reason why we must give our total support to the Ukrainian people. We must make sure that we go back to the fundamental policies of the European Union as regards defense, as regards energy. This is a matter of survival in this.
Thank you very much. The next one to speak is Mr. Dietmar Köster. The floor is yours. Go ahead.
This war of Russia, which runs counter to international law, must end as quickly as possible. Recent measures taken by the Russian regime, the illegal referendums, the renewed annexation, and the threat of the use of nuclear weapons must be fully rejected. Nuclear war would lead to complete destruction on all sides. It must be avoided at all costs. So we need the diplomats to finally take action. And this is the view of 77% of all Germans. Political offers need to be made in order to encourage both sides to lay down their weapons. Unfortunately, the Commission has been completely inactive in this area. Instead, there's encouragement to use more weapons and to stand on the battlefield, and that is not the way forward. Yes, we need to support Ukraine economically, politically, and militarily, but we also need to ensure diplomatic efforts, and too little is being done on that side. We see the Russian people are against the war, and that needs to be supported as well. Russia is breaking international law, and we in Europe need to do as much as possible in order to help our partners. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next one to speak is Madame Frances Fitzgerald. 1 minute. The floor is yours.
Colleagues, the war has entered a critical new stage with new victories from our brave and fighting Ukrainians every day. Ukrainian forces are advancing and regaining strategically important cities. Yet, as Ukraine advances, Putin ups his brinkmanship. The annexation by Russia of 4 Ukrainian regions last week further signified a deepening of his war efforts. His ruthlessness is exemplified by harrowing images of Ukrainians forced to vote at gunpoint, and of course the shocking images of recently released prisoners of war. So too the explosion within the Nord Stream 2 pipeline and the threat of the use of nuclear weapons. We too in Ireland must defend our crucial infrastructure off the coast. The threat draws closer. Democracy can prevail in Ukraine, but only with united support. And I mean united, right across Europe on all fronts. Absolute support on sanctions. Ukrainians are fighting for our values, our democracies. They fight for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next one to speak is Mr. Francisco José Millán Mon. The floor is yours.
Thank you, sir. Faced with this new escalation, there's one thing that I'd like to stress here, and that is how important it is for the European Union to give out a clear message. Remember that 141 countries at the General Assembly of the United Nations condemned Russia in March. But this condemnation has been translated into facts. There are very few countries that are actually applying sanctions. And I'm very worried about the abstention of Brazil and Gabon in the recent Social Security Council vote. The President of the African Union recently in Moscow said that the European sanctions ought to be lifted. Putin was in Samarkand recently with the leaders of India and China. Putin is not totally isolated yet, and therefore we must intensify our diplomatic offensive. And the President of the European Council should get more involved in this. This is no time for ambiguity, for indifference. This is a conflict between Russia and the whole of the international community. This is not an intra-European war. It's much vaster and wider than that. Its impact on the rest of the world is such that the world should become aware of this and act, therefore, in keeping.
Thank you very much. The next one to speak is Mr. Traian Basescu. The floor is yours.
Chair, Commissioner, Europe is going through a major security crisis as well as a major energy crisis. How come? How come we're here? Well, because in exchange for gas, for oil, and for coal from Russia, we've accepted the situation in Transnistria, the massacre in Grozny, the annexation of Ossetia and Abkhazia in Georgia, and the annexation of Crimea. We just stuck to sanctions that had no effect on Russia. Moreover, in 2008, a European state blocked the access of Ukraine to NATO. And now Putin is threatening Ukraine and Europe that he would use nuclear weapons. And his reasoning is that the United States have also used nuclear weapons in 1945. Indeed, in 1945, the Second World War ended, whereas using the nuclear weapons now in Ukraine would mean the beginning of a nuclear war. Ukraine needs support in terms of weapons in order to defend its territory, and only then can we begin negotiating. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next one to speak is Mr. Vladimir Bilčík. The floor is yours. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Commissioner, colleagues, the unprecedented attack, aggression, war crimes, nuclear threats, mobilisation, referenda, annexation, the words about escalation in practice, all these words mean the same. Russia keeps crossing the red line. They are destroying Ukraine, threatening European security, and they keep stamping on a European and global order. The European response must be unified. We need to be unified and determined. We need to join our forces with our allies in the world. We need to support Ukraine even more than we are. And we need to show that we are not to be blackmailed by Moscow. Moscow is on a path of no return. They have abandoned a civilized society. Now they are the outcasts of global order. Every investment into the victory of Ukraine is an investment into our own freedom and security. It is an investment in our own democracy, in a better future, where Europe will be joined by Ukraine, and once it will join our political sphere. Let us stand by Ukraine. Let us defend them, help them defend their territories, their people, their values. Ukrainians know how to win this war. Let us listen to them, and let us give them what they need. Slava Ukraini.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne.
Thank you very much.
As the blue cards will not be issued because we're running out of time and we need to start voting soon. Ďalšia v rozprave vystúpi.
The next one to speak is Madam Sunčana Glavak. The floor is yours.
Hvala lijepa predsjedavajući, kolegice I kolege.
Thank you, President. Ladies and gentlemen. The EU institutions have firmly condemned Russia's illegal annexation of the territory of a sovereign state. We reaffirmed our common determination to support the freedom and preserve the territorial integrity of Ukraine, as well as its economic and energy integrity. Russia's military invasion of a neighbouring country, occupation and attempt to forcefully seize and illegally appropriate foreign territory are the most flagrant examples of violations of the legal system on which the European and world order is based. My country, Croatia, strongly condemns the violent and illegal actions. We are seeing energy prices going up. We're all suffering the consequences of that in Europe, but we must not abandon Ukraine. We were the victims of aggression in Croatia too. We had a struggle for our own freedom and made major sacrifices. We cannot abandon Ukraine. We are speaking the language of peace. They speak the language of war. We must persist in our policies and our values, but we must also be very aware of Russia's geopolitical strategy. And we must continue with our measures.
I will only be able to have 3 catch-the-eye speeches, but 1 for each of the groups which have applied for it. And first, Mr. Eugen Tomak for 30 seconds.
Vă mulțumesc, domnule.
Thank you.
Nu mai e un secret pentru nimeni.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's clear that Putin has compromised himself forever and is now trying to compromise all relationships that we could have with Russia after the moment of peace. We need to stay the course, to remain united regarding Ukraine, because Putin hasn't managed to reach its goal to annex Ukraine within a matter of weeks, because we showed unity, and right now the Ukrainian army is ever more determined, more organized, because they feel that we've got their back, and Putin is in disarray and keeps threatening with the nuclear weapon. It's high time for this tyrant to understand that he cannot keep going further with this policy of terror and blackmail. We need to show solidarity and unity against this tyrant. Thank you very much.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne.
Thank you very much. The next one to speak is Madam Maria Grappini. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, Commissioner. I'd like to ask a question about the President of the Commission's declaration. Of course, the energy crisis and the conflict in Ukraine are things that make each other worse. So we've discussed about capping the gas price. I guess everyone agrees, but what does the President mean by mentioning a homogeneous level? What does that mean? There are countries where consumption per capita is 4 times less than the European average, and this is the case of my country. Those who already consume less, can they all cut down even more? I think we should pay attention here, and the Commission should suggest a mechanism that would not be detrimental to citizens that already use less, such as the citizens of my country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last one to speak is Mr. Georgios Kyrtsos. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, sir. The war unleashed by Russia upon Ukraine has entered into a new phase, which means new obligations for us. Ukraine is showing that it is very effective and it's very generous, and therefore we must increase the strategic assistance given to that country by the European Union, because they're far too dependent on the United States military assistance, and this may have an influence on their future decisions. We must win the war of information ideas against Putin. We're doing so because Putin is now undergoing internal pressure, but we must step up our efforts, and we cannot succumb to any form of populism. Last, there's still big European interests that are actually making a profit out of this war of Putin's, and therefore we must set even more limitations. We cannot simply allow that the sacrifice of so many should enrich a few.
Thank you very much. The next one to speak on behalf of the European Commission will be its Vice President Maroš Šefčovič.
Take your seats quietly so that we can hear Mr. Šefčovič's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, Mr. President of the Council of the European Union, dear Minister Beck. Today's debate focuses on the most important challenges of today's Europe. You all mentioned war on our continent, rightly pointed out the serious concerns of the people in Europe on high inflation, high energy prices, overall social cohesion, and of course on the future of our businesses and industry. And I really would like to thank all honourable members for what I felt was truly overwhelming support and solidarity with Ukrainian people. And I think that we can also state that every day we see that our support is crucial, that it works and it brings tangible results. And no sham referenda are going to change that. And I agree with Mr. Austrevicius or with Mr. Mian Mon that the decisions we are taking today will frame the European and I would say global security for many decades. Almost all of you, honourable members, highlighted how important the unity and solidarity are to deal with current energy prices and high inflation. As Madam Wattmans has said, this is time for truly European solutions, because only that approach will bring results we need. And you know that together with your support, we already did a lot. We reduced gas consumption, we decreased gas supplies coming from Russia in a significant manner, and we filled up our gas storages. But we all know that more is needed, and therefore we are going to skim exceptional profits of the energy companies to support vulnerable citizens and businesses. And thanks to the excellent work of the Czech presidency, we already found an agreement on Repower EU to provide additional resources in those efforts. It's clear that the next days will be of crucial importance for pushing our actions to the next level. President von der Leyen will send a roadmap in a letter to prepare the ground for a meeting of EU leaders in Prague. We will complement it with our negotiations with trusted partners, as for example Norway, to dampen the price we pay for energy. And we are going to use much more our strong market power as being a big economy and very important energy importer. I am sure that our suppliers, especially our friends and allies, want not only to conclude the deals which are beneficial for both sides, but they also want to support us in our principled positions to help Ukraine and further increase pressure on Russian aggressors. We want to make sure that we will take advantage of our big internal market and we will strengthen our energy platform to avoid a situation where member states are competing with each other, but rather we would work with them to support a common approach. To take on the inflationary impact of gas on electricity, today the President of the Commission was very clear in sending clear signals on our readiness to discuss cap on price for gas for generating electricity. We see it as another step not only to develop the new post-TTF price benchmark, but also to structurally reform our electricity market as it was called for by Monsieur Jadot or Madame Van Brandt. And to do it in a way that we will not only decouple gas from its unproportional impact on electricity price, but to forge new framework which will correspond to our goals to be climate neutral continent by 2050. On top of it, as you know, we are working on adaptation of temporary state aid framework to current energy situation, and I want to reassure you that we hear very loud and clear your calls to look for additional ways how to tackle high inflation, reduce energy prices and preserve our competitiveness, and most importantly for our citizens to uphold social standards in Europe. There have been concrete questions by Mr. Mureșan on Moldova. Just to be very brief, on top of our budgetary support and our macro-financial assistance in more than 225 million together, we are also helping through EIB, and we are helping with sending out the Frontex officers to deal with the migratory flows. I want also to acknowledge very clear questions and points by Madame Fritzen and Madame Kumpula-Natri concerning the visas for Russians, and here I think the very concrete guidelines proposed by my colleague Ylva Johansson are, I think, the best way forward. To Mr. Bart Groothuis, I want to reassure him that we are ready to explore all possibilities to look for additional avenues how to better protect our critical infrastructure, and we'll be looking forward to our cooperation in that regard. So to conclude, honourable members, I really would like to thank you for today's debate, for bringing lots of new ideas to the table, and to really make sure that, as we always do, we will prevail also this crisis and we will emerge stronger from this very challenging experience. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you very much. And on behalf of the Council, we will now listen to the Czech Minister for European Affairs, Mr. Mikuláš Bek. The floor is yours.
Mr. President, honourable members, Commissioner, by the way, I appreciate the opportunity to speak to a full House for a change. The views expressed here today bear witness to this Parliament's overwhelming and continued support for the EU's course of action towards Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. Listening to you, I reiterate the words expressed by the High Representative. Our efforts must continue. Our strategy to counter Russia's offensive has worked until now and must be sustained. Support Ukraine in all terms, pressure Russia and engage with the rest of the world. We will continue to provide military assistance to the Ukrainian government to ensure that recent military gains are sustainable in the long run. We also need to continue supporting Ukraine financially in a predictable way. In working with our international partners, we will make sure that Russia is held accountable for the crimes it has committed, and we will develop stronger tools to counter Russia's parallel war of disinformation. High Representative Borrell spoke at the beginning about the 8th sanctions package, and here I am pleased to inform you that EU ambassadors Coreper confirmed agreement on this package a couple of minutes ago. We see this package as a further step to isolate the Russian regime and weaken its capacity to pursue this war of aggression. The new sanctions package also represents a strong condemnation of the recent sham referenda and of Russia's illegal annexation of Ukrainian territories. President, Vice President of the Commission, honourable members, as you know, the motto of our presidency is Europe as a task, inspired by an essay by Czech President Václav Havel. It is symbolically today, the day of Václav Havel's birthday, that we are discussing one of the most important tasks that lie ahead of us. Many thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much. I have received 5 proposals for a resolution to conclude this debate. I can conclude this discussion. The vote will be held tomorrow.
Ms. Thatcher-Nelbart has left the non-attached members and joins the EPP group as from 5th of October this year. Now we'll continue with the vote.
Die Sitzung ist wieder aufgenommen.
The sitting is resumed. We now come to the votes. It's quite a lengthy vote, so please bear with me, and I'd ask for your support to ensure that we can get through this as efficiently